I never thought the smell of diesel and pine needles would stay in my nostrils forever, haunting me in the quiet moments when I was supposed to feel safe. The Volkswagen camper was packed with supplies, blankets folded just so, the little stove tucked in next to the sink. And yet, as I drove toward the outskirts of the national forest that November, I felt a tightness in my chest I couldn't explain. My name is Aaron, 32, and I've been camping in Volkswagens for most of my adult life. I pride myself on preparation, on reading the weather, the maps, the campsite reviews. I know the importance of respecting nature, of staying calm when things go wrong. But that week, nothing I knew prepared me for what I was about to face. The forest was a mix of dark greens and browns, the kind of woods that feel older than the land around them, with trees that seemed to lean in, listening to every footstep and whisper. I had chosen a lesser-known campground, one that a local named Hank, a man with a sunburned face and a voice like gravel, swore was the quietest spot you'll ever find. It wasn't on Google Maps, wasn't on any app. You only found it if someone like Hank trusted you enough to give directions. I didn't question him. That's how most of my stories started, trusting locals and their hidden corners of the world. The first night, the cold hit harder than I expected. November in that part of the state doesn't care if you've packed a blanket or two. I was alone in the camper, the heater rattling softly, my hands wrapped around a mug of coffee when I first heard it. A tapping. Soft at first, like a branch brushing against the side of the van, but there was a rhythm to it, deliberate. I told myself it was the wind, old trees settling. That explanation almost worked, until the tapping moved. It shifted from one side of the camper to the other. Every time I tilted my head toward the sound, it stopped. Sleep didn't come easily. I kept my flashlight under my pillow, my phone on the edge of the bed, fingers hovering over the screen. Every creak of the camper, every groan of the old Volkswagen's frame set my heart racing. Then I heard breathing, not my own, shallow and uneven, but a soft, exhaled rhythm somewhere outside. I sat up, coffee spilling over my hand, and shone the light toward the window. Nothing. Nothing at all. I told myself that too. Nothing, until I saw it. A shadow moved across the ground, long and thin, stretching from behind a tree toward the van. My mind raced with logical possibilities. A deer, maybe a raccoon, a camper walking by, but there was no movement of bushes, no rustling of leaves. The shadow simply glided, deliberate, almost patient. I gripped the edge of the bed, my knuckles white, and whispered to myself, "Keep breathing. Keep calm. Nothing is real until you see it." By the third night, I had learned not to sleep deeply. The tapping came again, faster now, and every few minutes I'd hear that same slow, deliberate breathing. I checked the locks, double-checked the heater, even shoved the small camping knife under my pillow. I didn't know what I was expecting. Proof? A sign? Some final confirmation that I wasn't just losing my mind? That's when I met Marcy. She was a fellow camper, mid-30s, with short dark hair and a laugh that didn't quite reach her eyes. I found her by accident, or maybe the forest guided me to her. She was parked 2 sites down, a van nearly identical to mine. She had been at the campground for 3 nights already, and, judging by the lines of worry around her eyes, had experienced the same unease. We exchanged warnings first, stories second, and soon I realized that whatever was happening to me was happening to her too. Marcy told me about the previous week. Other campers had left abruptly, unexplained sounds driving them out before dawn. She herself had seen figures in the distance, standing still for hours, almost like they were waiting for something or someone. I asked if she ever considered calling the authorities. She shook her head. "They'd find nothing," she said. "Nothing but trees and dirt. That's the thing about this place. It hides." By the 4th night, I stopped trying to rationalize. The tapping wasn't random anymore. It had a cadence, almost a language, and then the whispers started. Low, unintelligible at first, but growing in urgency, as if something was trying to communicate. I could feel it crawling along my spine, pressing against the very fibers of my resolve. Marcy and I huddled inside our respective vans, doors locked, windows closed, listening to the forest mutter and shift around us. Every few minutes, a gust of wind would push against the side of my camper, hard enough to make the frame groan, and for a heartbeat, I was sure it was coming for me. We decided to face it together. Around midnight, armed with flashlights and our bravest faces, we stepped out. The cold cut through our jackets, a reminder that nature doesn't negotiate. The forest looked peaceful under the moon, deceptive in its beauty, but the air smelled wrong. Earthy, yes, but undercut with something metallic, almost like iron. My stomach nodded. Every sound was amplified, the snap of twigs underfoot, the rustle of leaves, the faint echo of something that didn't belong. Then we saw them. Figures, barely more than silhouettes, moving at the edges of the trees. They weren't running, weren't crouched, they glided, tall, thin, featureless, and utterly silent except for the low hum that seemed to emanate from their presence. Marcy grabbed my arm. "Run," she whispered, but I couldn't. Part of me wanted to study them, understand, even negotiate. Stupidity, bravery, whatever it was, it froze me. They noticed us then, or maybe they always had. They shifted closer, just past the reach of our flashlights, and that metallic smell grew stronger. I could taste it in the back of my throat. We made it back to our vans, hearts hammering, lungs burning from cold air and panic. Marcy slammed her door shut and bolted the locks, and I did the same. For hours, we sat in our respective campers, listening. The forest didn't sleep, and neither could we. By sunrise, everything was gone. No traces, no footprints, no whispering figures, only the sun piercing through the trees, mocking us with its calm normalcy. That week changed me, not just because of what I saw or what I felt, but because I learned something essential. Fear is not something to fight. It's a guide. It tells you where to tread carefully, where to trust your instincts, where to respect boundaries invisible to the untrained eye. In that Volkswagen, with the heater rattling and the diesel scent hanging in the air, I learned that survival isn't about courage alone. It's about listening, observing, and respecting the unknown. By the last night, we knew we had to leave. We packed quickly, silently, casting nervous glances at the forest that had seemed to watch us for days. As we drove away, the first rays of dawn turned the tree line gold, making it look almost welcoming. But the lessons stuck. The fear, the unease, the whispers, they were with me. And as I drove down the winding road, my hands steady now on the wheel, I knew I'd return someday, but differently. Smarter, more cautious, more attentive. Volkswagen camping isn't just a hobby. It's a lesson in respect, patience, and the quiet understanding that sometimes the forest watches and survival depends on honoring that. The road out of that forest felt endless, though it was only a few miles. Every mile marker we passed seemed to tease me, like the forest had stretched itself thin to keep watching. Marcy rode quietly beside me, her eyes fixed on the windshield, hands gripping the steering wheel of her van like it was the only thing keeping her tethered to reality. Neither of us spoke for the first 20 minutes, letting the silence between the diesel hum and the occasional crunch of gravel settle. It was a fragile peace, and I could feel the tension pressing against the thin walls of our campers, almost as if the forest wanted to follow us home. We found a small diner on the edge of a town just outside the forest. Neon lights flickered, and the smell of fried eggs and bacon filled the air, a welcome contrast to the metallic tang that had haunted us for days. We ordered coffee, black and bitter, letting it warm our hands and calm our nerves. But even amid the chatter of other patrons, the mundane sounds of silverware clinking and chairs scraping the floor, I couldn't shake the feeling that the forest had attached itself to us. Every shadow on the walls seemed elongated, deliberate, almost like an echo of the shapes we'd seen in the trees. Marcy spoke first, her voice low, almost a whisper despite the crowded diner. "I've been thinking," she said, stirring her coffee, "about what we saw, about the way it moved, the smell, the whispers. I think it's guarding something." I froze mid-sip. Guarding something? My mind raced, circling the images of those gliding silhouettes. They hadn't seemed hostile, not directly, but their presence had forced us into panic, had pushed us to the edge of our instincts. Guarding what? I asked, though I feared the answer. Anything, she said. A site, a secret, or maybe just the forest itself. Some places out there, they aren't meant for us. We walk in thinking we're visitors, but really we're intruders. Her words hung between us, heavy and unavoidable. I wanted to argue, to rationalize, to pretend it was just fear and exhaustion, but I couldn't. I had felt that weight, that deliberate watchfulness, every night we spent parked among the pines. Back in the Volkswagen, driving further away, I noticed how different the air smelled outside the forest. Fresh, dry, almost sterile. The oppressive pressure of the trees, the subtle vibration of the unknown, it all stayed behind, leaving us only with memory and adrenaline. I realized then how easily we can underestimate nature, how we assume familiarity is safety. But fear, I understood now, is not just instinct, it's information. It tells you what is safe to ignore and what deserves your attention. We made a pact to never return to that campground. We didn't need to discuss the rules of survival explicitly. The forest had written them for us in whispers and shadows. But the experience changed more than our approach to camping. It altered how I moved through the world, how I processed unease, how I listened to the small voice in my gut that says, sometimes it's not enough to be prepared. Sometimes the world itself has rules you don't see until you break them. Weeks passed. I tried to slip back into normal life, into work, into conversations that didn't involve shadowed trees or gliding figures. But every time I smelled pine or the faint tang of diesel, I felt the pressure returning, the subtle reminder of that forest and its silent guardians. I knew the fear wasn't just in the woods. It was in me now. And with it came an understanding I hadn't expected. Fear is not something to be defeated. It is a guide, an invisible map etched into your nervous system, leading you where knowledge alone cannot. I returned to Volkswagen camping months later, cautiously, intentionally. Not to that forest, never to that forest, but to places where the rules were gentler, where shadows were only shadows, and taps on the camper roof were wind and falling branches. I carried the lessons with me. Trust the local advice, observe patterns in the natural world, respect the boundaries that exist beyond your sight. And I listened more carefully than ever, not just to the forest, but to the instincts it had awakened in me. There was one night, late autumn, when I parked near a small lake, a place that seemed ordinary in every sense. The air was cold, the water dark, and I settled in the Volkswagen with blankets and a small lantern. Everything was quiet. Too quiet. I remembered the first night in that forest, the tapping and the breathing, and I checked the locks, made sure the heater was steady, and listened. Hours passed. Nothing unusual happened, and I felt relief rising in my chest. But as I drifted toward sleep, I realized something crucial. Survival is not about conquering fear. It's about holding space for it, understanding it, and letting it guide your decisions. That awareness alone is what keeps you alive. Marcy and I met again once, several months after our first encounter. We shared a campsite miles from the haunted forest, where the woods were familiar and welcoming. Around the campfire, she told me about her own experiences, about a small clearing where the wind seemed to form words if you listened closely, and I nodded, understanding perfectly. We didn't need to embellish or compare stories. The lesson was the same. The forest teaches, and survival depends on what you carry from that teaching. I think back to that first week often. I think of the shadowed trees, the whispers, the figures that glided between the trunks, and I understand something deeply personal. Volkswagen camping, or any form of traveling through wilderness, is not just a hobby. It is a test of awareness, patience, and respect. Every sight you choose, every rustle you hear is a small story in the larger narrative of survival. The forest does not forgive arrogance. It does not forget intrusion, but it rewards attentiveness, humility, and courage tempered by wisdom. And as I prepare for my next trip in November 2025, packing the Volkswagen with supplies, blankets, and a sense of readiness, I feel the weight of that lesson again. I know the forest waits with unseen eyes and deliberate patience. I know the wind will carry secrets and warnings I may not immediately understand. And I know, most importantly, that fear, when acknowledged and respected, becomes more than just a sensation. It becomes a map, a guide, and a teacher. Every time I turn the key and hear the engine roar to life, every time I roll down the highway past familiar and unfamiliar forests alike, I am reminded that survival is not about controlling the world around you. It is about controlling yourself, controlling your response to the unknown, and never underestimating the quiet intelligence of the world beyond the camper windows. I have learned, slowly and painfully, that there is beauty in terror, clarity in chaos, and wisdom in hesitation. November nights are long, the wind bitter, and the forests vast, but the Volkswagen, my small mobile home, is both shield and classroom. Each trip teaches me more about fear, about observation, about respecting the unseen. I have learned to anticipate, to read, to listen, and to honor the boundaries that are invisible to the untrained eye. When I finally return home and the engine cools, the diesel scent lingering faintly in the air, I reflect not on what terrified me, but on what it taught me. Every shadow, every tap, every whisper was a message. The world is alive in ways we rarely understand, and survival depends on the humility to recognize that. I've learned to carry fear with me, to let it instruct rather than control, and to approach each new campsite with the quiet reverence it deserves. And so as November 2025 approaches, I prepare once again, wiser and more cautious. I know the road will be dark, the nights long, and the forest indifferent to my presence. But I am not the same camper I was before. I am alert, I am respectful, and I am listening. Because survival, true survival, is not about escaping fear. It's about learning from it, letting it sharpen your senses, and allowing it to guide you safely through the unknown. The road stretched ahead, empty and silent, the kind of quiet that makes every turn feel like it could conceal the impossible. November had settled in fully now, the air crisp, almost biting, and the sky a deep gray that promised both snow and shadow. I parked the Volkswagen at the edge of a clearing I discovered earlier that year, a place where the trees opened into a small meadow and the moonlight hit the ground in sharp silver slices. Alone for the first time in months, I felt the tension of the forest pressing against my chest, but this time it was tempered with understanding, not panic. I stepped out, boots crunching against frost-tipped grass, and took a slow breath. The metallic tang I had encountered months ago was absent, replaced with the sharp, clean scent of late autumn. Still, I didn't lower my guard. Instinct had become my compass, and instinct told me to observe, to listen, and above all, to respect what I could not explain. I lit a small lantern outside the camper, letting its warm glow carve a circle of safety around me. Shadows stretched at the edges, long and cold, but they no longer seemed like enemies. They were part of the language I had begun to understand. Hours passed. The wind whispered, carrying leaves across the meadow like scattered letters in a secret message. At first, I thought I imagined the soft cadence, the rise and fall that mimicked words. Then I realized the forest had a rhythm, a voice of its own. I didn't need to decipher it fully. I only needed to acknowledge it, to move through it with care, to let it guide my movements. My fear had become precision, and precision had become survival. And then it came, the sound I had feared most in that first forest, tapping, soft, deliberate, moving around the perimeter of the clearing. I froze, heart hammering, breath shallow. But now, instead of cowering inside the camper, I walked toward the sound. Each step was deliberate, measured, conscious. I wasn't running. I wasn't hiding. I was listening. The tap, tap, tap echoed in the crisp air, a rhythm almost musical in its persistence, almost human, almost, but not human. I could feel it, not in sight or sound alone, but in the awareness that the forest imparted directly into my chest. It stopped abruptly. And then from the far edge of the meadow, a figure emerged, or rather, glided. It was tall, thin, and featureless as it had been before. But this time I didn't feel terror. I felt respect. I raised my hand slowly, instinct guiding the gesture, and for a long, tense moment, the figure held its position. And then, as silently as it had come, it vanished into the shadows. The lesson had been given, delivered without words, without confrontation, without violence. Boundaries had been observed, understood, and honored. I returned to the Volkswagen, my hands trembling, but not with fear, with understanding, with gratitude. That night, wrapped in blankets, the heater humming softly, I realized that survival is never about conquering the unknown. It is about entering it with humility, patience, and awareness. Every tap, every whisper, every shadow was a teacher. Every fear, once faced, became a guide, a map etched into memory that could steer me safely through danger I might never fully comprehend. Morning came slowly, pale light spilling across frost-crusted grass. I packed the Volkswagen with care, checking supplies, folding blankets, and preparing for the drive back to the highway. There was no rush now, no desperation, only awareness and the quiet confidence born of experience. Each mile away from the clearing felt lighter, yet the lessons stayed with me, carved deep into muscle memory and instinct alike. I think back often to that first forest, to Marcy, to the figures, the whispers, the tapping. I think of the fear that gripped me, the adrenaline that made my hands shake, the moments when my mind refused to acknowledge the reality of what was happening. And I understand now that fear, when properly recognized and respected, is not weakness. It is knowledge, it is wisdom. It is the bridge between danger and survival. Volkswagen camping, as I have learned, is more than adventure. It is practice in observation, in patience, in humility. Every forest, every lake, every hidden campsite is a classroom. Every unexpected sound, smell, or shadow is a lesson. And the greatest lesson of all is this: fear is not an enemy to be defeated. It is a teacher to be honored. As November 2025 approaches, I prepare once again. The Volkswagen is ready. Blankets folded, stove packed, supplies organized. I carry the lessons of that haunted forest with me, not as baggage, but as guidance. I know the road will be long, the nights dark, and the woods indifferent. I know the wind may carry whispers, shadows may stretch and glide, and tapping may echo against the side of my camper. But I am ready. Not because I am fearless, but because I am aware, alert, and respectful of the world's unseen boundaries. And when the night grows deep and the silence thick, when the trees lean in and the air feels alive, I remind myself, this is not terror. This is learning. This is survival. This is what it means to be alive in a world that does not bend to expectation. And as the Volkswagen hums along the highway, headlights cutting through the dark, I feel a quiet pride. I have faced the unknown. I have listened. I have survived. And I will continue to do so, not just in this forest or the next after that, but every time I step into the woods, into the unknown, into life itself. Because in the end, survival is never about escaping fear. It is about letting it teach you, guide you, and sharpen you until you understand something profound. The world is full of unseen forces, quiet lessons, and invisible boundaries. Respect them, learn from them, and you will not just survive. You will endure, wiser, braver, and ever more aware of the delicate, terrifying beauty of the unknown. I've always believed that the most dangerous thing in the woods isn't the weather or the isolation or even the wildlife. It's the moment you realize you're not the one watching the forest. The forest is watching you. And once you feel that, you don't ever forget it. My name is Micah Gray. I'm 36 now, and I've been running solo RV trips across the country since my 20s. I've camped in deserts where the heat shimmered like a hallucination, mountains where the wind never stops whispering, and back roads where even the GPS feels like it wants to give up. But nothing ever shook me like what happened at a little primitive campground on the edge of Umatilla National Forest in northeastern Oregon. People joke about cryptids out here, Sasquatch stickers, missing posters, talk at diners about guttural calls echoing through the timberline. I always nodded along, amused, feeling like I was in on some local secret. But that year, I wasn't looking for monsters. I was looking for quiet. I'd just gotten out of a long, messy breakup, the kind that makes you question your own judgment. And the woods, they were supposed to reset my internal compass. Give me silence. Give me something pure. But the woods gave me something else. It was early October, cold enough at night for the breath from my nose to fog the inside of my RV, but warm enough during the day to keep the roads open. I pulled up to the campground in the early afternoon. Only 4 sites: pit toilet, 1 water spigot, not another soul in sight, just the way I liked it. I'd barely cut the engine when I heard it, this low, vibrating thud from somewhere beyond the tree line. Not a branch breaking, not a log falling, more like a fist hitting earth, a deliberate sound. 2 beats, then silence. I told myself it was nothing, just natural settling, maybe a distant hunter, maybe some animal tossing its weight around. My instinct tugged on me harder than usual. Something about the rhythm didn't feel wild. It felt intentional, but I had come out here to stop letting irrational fear drive my decisions. So I rationalized it. I forced myself to ignore the way my pulse quickened. Quiet unease. I felt it start right there. I set up camp, leveled the RV, and walked around the perimeter out of habit. My boots sank softly into weeks-old pine needles, the smell sharp and clean, grounding me. The sun filtered down through the ponderosas in thin, slanted beams. Normal. Everything looked normal. But then I found the tracks. Not footprints, at least not human ones. Not hoof prints either. They looked almost like elongated paw prints, 4 distinct depressions, each one deep and wide, like something heavy had stood there for too long. But what froze me wasn't the shape, it was the distance between them. Whatever made those prints had a stride longer than anyone should. I crouched down, brushing pine duff away from one of the impressions. The soil was compacted at the center, like the creature leaned its weight inward when it walked, and the edges were clean, fresh, hours fresh. I whispered to myself, "You're being dramatic. You're seeing patterns because your mind is tired." But the truth was already trying to surface. Something big was wandering this area, and it didn't care about staying hidden. Still, I unpacked. I cooked dinner on the small steel grate by the fire ring, and as the last light drained out of the sky, that tension I'd been ignoring finally pressed against me. The air felt charged, like the woods were holding their breath. Around 9 p.m., the temperature had dropped fast. My fire crackled low, shadows bunching together at the edges of the clearing. My RV sat behind me, its windows catching the soft flicker of flame. I had just leaned back in my camp chair, trying to let the heat sink into my bones when I heard the sound again. The thud. This time closer, not deep in the woods, maybe 20 yards out. Another thud followed, heavier than before, each one spaced apart like footsteps that didn't care about hiding their approach. I tried to swallow, but my throat felt dry as dust. Then came the breathing, a long, slow exhale that almost sounded like an animal, but carried this strange, human-like cadence. Wet, strained, a breath forced through something too large to be natural. Every instinct in me screamed to go inside the RV, lock the door, hide. But another instinct, the one built from years of camping, told me that quick movements draw attention. Predators notice, and I suddenly didn't know what kind of predator I was dealing with. So I stayed seated, rigid, barely breathing, branches shifted, heavy weight brushed against undergrowth. Something big was circling the outer ring of light cast by my fire. I couldn't see it yet, I could only hear it, the kind of slow, deliberate movement that belongs to an apex hunter that doesn't rush anything. My hands tightened on the armrests. The shadows moved. Something slid between 2 trunks, a silhouette taller than any person I'd ever seen. Shoulders too broad, limbs that didn't move quite human. It stayed just far enough away that only the outline caught the firelight, but it stood there, facing me, breathing. I whispered, half prayer, half command. Not real. You're imagining this. It's the fire throwing shapes, but the shape didn't flicker, didn't distort, didn't vanish. It stepped closer, and the sound, that step wasn't the crunch of a deer or elk. It was the deep compression of soil beneath weight. Suspicion snapped into dread so fast I felt my stomach drop. I forced myself to stand, slow, steady. My knees wanted to buckle, but I kept them locked, pretending strength I didn't have. The shape froze again. I said softly, as steady as I could manage, "I see you." I don't know why I said it. Maybe acknowledging a threat makes it feel less like a nightmare. Maybe I thought sounding confident would keep me alive. The thing responded by tilting its head. Not animal, not human. Something in between, with an intelligence behind that stillness that felt wrong. I stepped backward once. The fire popped, sending sparks upward. That tiny sound, the burst of sap, must have startled it because it moved. Not toward me, around me, fast. It circled wide, staying in the dark where I couldn't see the details. My breath shook so hard my teeth tapped together. I backed toward the RV door, every instinct telling me to run, every fear telling me running would trigger a chase. I wasn't afraid of dying. I was afraid of knowing what I'd see if it stepped fully into the firelight. I reached the RV handle. My fingers hovered. I didn't dare look away from the tree line. The silhouette had vanished again. Silence. Total, crushing silence. Then, directly behind me, a breath against the metal wall of the RV. Deep, hot, moist enough that it fogged the window beside me. That was when panic snapped through me like a live wire. I yanked the door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut so hard the whole frame rattled. My heart hammered against my ribs, every rational thought evaporating in the surge of fear. But before I could even lock the door, something pressed against the back of the RV. Not a hit, a push. Slow, steady, testing strength. The RV shifted on its leveling blocks, and for the first time since arriving, I realized I might not survive the night. The RV shifted again, the leveling blocks groaning under the strain. I grabbed the counter to steady myself, breath tearing out in short, uneven bursts. The metal skin of the RV vibrated under whatever was leaning against it. Slow pressure, like a testing hand running along the outside of a cage. I forced myself to lock the door, sliding every latch with fingers that felt stiff and clumsy. The interior went dark except for the soft amber glow of the overhead LED. My own reflection stared back at me in the window, wide-eyed, pale, trembling. Behind that reflection for a split second, I thought I saw a darker shape in the trees. But when I blinked, it was gone. The pushing stopped, not gradually, just gone, as if the creature had never touched the RV at all. Silence returned, but not the calming kind. This was the kind that sits heavy in your lungs, making every breath feel stolen. I strained to listen. No footsteps, no breathing, no movement. Just the wind stirring needles overhead and the faint metallic tick of the engine cooling. Part of me whispered, maybe it left. But another part, the one I'd learned to trust on countless solo trips, warned me not to believe that. Predators don't just lose interest. They wait. I pulled down the blackout covers on the windows, but hesitated on the last one. The narrow window above the sink. It faced the tree line, the place where the silhouette had first appeared. My hands didn't want to move. Some primal instinct deep in my spine told me that pulling that shade down would force me to look out first, even for a second. And if something was standing there, the air pressed in on me, thick as wet wool. I took a shaky breath. You've handled crazier nights. Windstorms, coyotes, human weirdos who couldn't take a hint. This is just fear talking. But the truth was, I'd never felt fear like this. Not the thin, sharp kind that comes in a sudden shock. This was the slow, suffocating type. The kind that spreads like cold water up your legs until your whole body is submerged. I forced the shade down. The moment it clicked into place, something scraped lightly across the roof of the RV. Not claws, not footsteps, fingers. I froze mid-motion, palms flat on the counter. The sound moved slowly, dragging from the back vent toward the front, like someone was tracing the path of the ceiling with deliberate curiosity. My heart pounded so hard I wondered if whatever was above me could hear it. A soft tap followed, then another. Directly above where I stood. Tap, tap, tap. Each one spaced with unnatural precision, my vision blurred at the edges. I forced myself to step backward toward the bathroom, the safest place in the RV. No windows, only one way in. But before I could take more than a stride, a low rumble vibrated through the roof. A growl. Not animal, not fully. It sounded like something trying to mimic a growl without knowing how a throat was supposed to shape it. I covered my mouth to keep from making any sound. My breath broke against my palm, warm and shaky. Another growl trembled through the RV, deeper this time, like it was testing pitch. Then there came a soft huffing, short, sniffing breaths, as if the creature were scenting the air through the vents. It knows I'm in here. The realization hit me like a punch to the ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to run. But run where? Into the woods? Into its territory? The RV was supposed to be the safe barrier between me and whatever roamed outside, but that illusion was crumbling with each scrape along the roof. The sniffing stopped. I held my breath. Silence. Then from the front of the RV, something long and heavy slid down the windshield, squealing faintly against the glass. I turned in time to see the outline, a shadow stretching across the window, elongated fingers splayed as it descended. It wasn't looking in. It was feeling its way down, mapping the vehicle, searching. My legs nearly buckled. I backed into the bathroom, shut the door quietly, and sat on the closed toilet seat, wrapping my arms around myself. The small space felt safer, but also like a coffin. No escape, no visibility, only darkness and the thin hum of the ceiling fan. For several minutes, 5, 10, there was nothing. No scraping, no breathing, no movement. The stillness ate at my nerves, winding them tighter and tighter until the silence itself felt like a threat. My mind started slipping into memories without permission. My ex had told me once, "You don't know when to trust your instincts, Micah. You confuse fear with danger. You act like they're the same thing." I told myself she was wrong. Right now, I didn't know anymore. I finally mustered the courage to press my ear to the bathroom door. Nothing outside. Just the faint hiss of wind lifting the edges of the forest canopy. Maybe it really left. The doorknob jerked. Not violently, not trying to break in. Just a single testing twist, like someone trying to see if the bathroom was occupied. I slapped both hands over my mouth, swallowing a cry that burned the back of my throat. The knob turned halfway again, metal clicking softly under the pressure of a hand far too large to be human. My pulse thundered in my ears. The knob stilled. For one long, agonizing moment, I waited for the door to burst inward. But instead, the hand slowly released, and the knob returned to its resting position. Then came footsteps, but not heavy ones, not the massive ground-shaking thuds from before. These steps were disturbingly light, careful, as if the creature were walking on its toes, mimicking the softness of human movement. 1, 2, 3. Heading toward the sleeping area, my bed. A cold wave washed through me. It wasn't hunting, it was exploring, curious, learning the shape and layout of my space the way an animal learns a new territory. I waited until I couldn't hear anything, no steps, no breathing, not even the creak of shifting weight. Then, inch by inch, I opened the bathroom door. The RV looked exactly the same as before. Nothing broken, nothing overturned. Just the stillness of a night pretending to be normal. But the air smelled different now. Warm, damp, sharp, like saliva drying on metal. I moved toward the front, each step a negotiation between instinct and adrenaline. The blackout shades fluttered lightly from a draft that shouldn't exist. When I reached the cab, I froze. Something was pressed against the outside of the windshield. A handprint. Massive, smudged, 4 long fingers, one shorter, thumb-like appendage. The smear of moisture left streaks running down the glass like tears. I stared at it, breath rattling out of me. Quiet unease had become tension. Tension had become suspicion. Suspicion had become dread. And dread had bloomed fully into panic. But something else bloomed with it. Anger. This RV was my home, my safe place, my refuge. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just stalking me, it was violating the one boundary I had always trusted. That anger gave me enough clarity to do the one thing I hadn't dared: look outside. I lifted a corner of the shade with trembling fingers. At first, I saw nothing but darkness and the faint suggestion of movement in the branches. Then, not 20 feet away, I saw 2 eyes. Pale, reflective, not glowing, but catching the ambient light in a way that felt almost deliberate. The eyes didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't widen at being seen. They just watched. A slow exhale fogged the glass between us. I stepped backward, My heel hit the edge of a cabinet, the eyes vanished, but the sound that followed, a deep, resonant grunt from somewhere in the dark, told me the creature was still there. It wasn't leaving. And something in that grunt, something about the tone, made me realize the creature wasn't just observing me. It was waiting. For what? I didn't know. But I felt in my bones that the night was far from over. The grunt faded into the trees, swallowed by distance, or maybe by intention. I stayed standing in the center of the RV, listening so hard it felt like I'd shoved my whole mind out through my ears. But all I heard was the faint ticking of cooling metal and my heartbeat pounding like it wanted to escape my chest. I backed up until I felt the edge of the dinette seat against my thighs, then slid down and pressed my palms over my face. Every muscle in my body felt rigid, as if fear had crystallized inside me. But beneath the panic, beneath the disorientation, something else was building, something I didn't want to acknowledge. Curiosity. Not the normal kind, not the healthy kind. Something darker. A pull, as if the fear itself was bait. I pushed the thought away. Don't lose it, Micah. Not tonight. I forced myself to breathe slowly, to calm the racing in my chest just enough to think. I needed a plan. Staying frozen would only make me unravel faster. But what plan can you make when something outside knows the layout of your home, your movements, your scent? I rose quietly and checked the small drawer next to the sink. My hand closed around the flare gun I kept for emergencies, the kind meant for lost hikers or signaling rescuers. But tonight, it meant something different. A barrier, a warning, a last line of defense. My hand shook as I loaded a single flare. It wasn't meant for close range, but the idea of holding something, anything, felt like reclaiming a sliver of control. The RV creaked softly as the wind nudged it. I flinched, lifting the flare gun slightly, but quickly realized the shift wasn't from outside. It was coming from the roof, again. Slow, heavy weight pressed on the metal from above, a shift of mass as if something had settled into a crouch. The subtle groan of aluminum under stress. The creature hadn't left. It had climbed back up, quietly this time, as if testing whether I'd react. Every hair on my body stood on end. Tap. Something tapped directly above the vent over my bed. Once. Then twice. Soft, rhythmic, like knocking on a door only the creature understood. Tap, tap, tap. Not urgent, not hostile, communicative. The idea made my skin crawl. I inched toward the center of the RV, tilting my head to follow the sound. Whatever was up there shifted again, crawling, not with the uncertain movement of a bear or cat, but with an eerie, deliberate slowness. Too precise, too controlled. I whispered before I could stop myself. What do you want? The roof went silent. Then the breathing began again. Deep, resonant breaths pressed down just inches above me, vibrating through the ceiling panels. Each exhale felt like a warm gust against my scalp, even through the insulation. My chest tightened, my hands trembled, and then, with a suddenness that made me jump, something scraped its entire arm, its entire length, across the roof from the front to the back, a heavy drag as though marking territory. The fear snapped inside me like a broken branch. This wasn't curiosity anymore. This was a message, a warning, or something worse. I retreated toward the driver's seat, not to drive. God no, starting the engine might provoke it, but to put distance between me and whatever crawled overhead. The smudged handprint on the windshield still glistened with pale residue, as if whatever left it had some kind of oily secretion. I stared at it, pulse hammering, and something clicked in my memory. Last spring, at a gas station outside La Grande, an older man, grizzled, wide-eyed, more serious than anyone telling a campfire story should be, had pulled me aside. He'd seen the stickers on my RV, national parks, forests, trailheads. He told me to stay out of Umatilla, said something lived there, something tall, patient, intelligent enough to avoid roads but curious enough to mimic humans. At the time, I'd smiled, nodded, indulged him. I'd heard dozens of stories like that on my travels. People love to share their local monsters. They love the thrill of fear when they're miles away from danger. But now, remembering his warning, my blood ran cold. Another sound snapped me out of the memory, not from the roof, from the passenger side window, a faint, deliberate scratch. One long line dragged across the glass, slow enough that the squeal vibrated up my spine. Then another, and another. 3 lines. Parallel, like claws marking a tree. My breath caught somewhere between my lungs and throat. I raised the flare gun with shaking hands, pointing it toward the sound, even though firing through the window would blind me. The scratching stopped. Silence again. Then, a shadow swept across the side of the RV. Not fast, not darting. Floating, like something massive gliding along the wall, barely brushing it. I peered through the blackout shade, lifting it just enough to create a sliver of vision. Nothing. A wall of darkness. I lowered the shade slowly. That's when the creature pressed its entire face, against the fabric from the outside. I didn't see the details. Not fully. Just a massive shape flattening the shade inward, the faint outline of a forehead, a ridge, a jaw too long to be human. The brushing sound of deep, controlled breathing. I staggered backward, barely catching myself on the edge of the table. The shade quivered. The weight pulled away. And then, a knock. Right next to me. On the side door. 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Not random, not accidental. Knuckles. I nearly dropped the flare gun. My mind raced, trying to understand, trying to rationalize, trying to cling to any explanation other than the impossible. The knocks came again. Soft, polite, as if asking permission, as if waiting for me to open the door. No. 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 I bolted toward the rear of the RV, heart slamming against my ribs. The knocking followed me, first on the door, then on the wall near the kitchen, then by the rear storage compartment. It moved with me. It knew exactly where I was. My breath came in ragged gasps. Something primal inside me began to fray. This wasn't just fear anymore. This was the beginning of unraveling. The creature circled slowly, tapping every few seconds, not aggressively, experimentally. The taps stopped at the back window. I didn't want to look. I told myself not to look. But something in the silence made me turn, just slightly, toward the shade. A silhouette towered outside the glass, broader than the window frame, too tall to see fully from this angle, shoulders sloping in a way that suggested impossible anatomy. It didn't move. It was waiting again. My breath shook so hard it felt like sobbing without sound. Another grunt rolled from the creature. Closer, deeper, infused with an emotion I hadn't heard before. Not anger, not hunger, something like frustration. Realization hit me hard. It wasn't just observing. It wasn't just hunting. It wanted something from me. And for the first time that night, a new fear slid in under the rest. The fear that this creature wasn't done. Not even close. That the knocking, the circling, the watching, all of it was leading somewhere. Something was coming, and the night hadn't even reached its darkest hour. The window shade fluttered slightly as the silhouette shifted outside, and for a moment the entire RV felt too small to contain the panic rising inside me. I could hear my breath, ragged, uneven, almost foreign, filling the tight space around me. The creature didn't move away. It didn't retreat. It simply stood there, its presence pressing against the thin pane of glass like a question I couldn't afford to answer. Then came the weight. Not a push this time, not the testing pressure from earlier. A hand, wide and deliberate, settled against the rear window. The frame creaked under its touch, metal flexing with a soft groan. I could see the shadow of it through the shade, fingers long enough that their tips nearly brushed the sides of the frame. It wasn't trying to break in. It was reminding me it could. I stepped backward until my shoulders hit the bathroom wall again. I wanted to disappear into it, to melt into the paneling and sink through the floor. Instead, I let myself slide down to the carpet, my knees pulled to my chest, flare gun trembling loosely in my grip. Stay calm, Micah. Stay rational. Fear doesn't equal danger. But fear sure felt like danger now. The hand withdrew and the pressure on the window eased. I held my breath, waiting for the next knock, the next scrape, the next sign that it was circling again. But instead, silence. A long, stretching silence that made the tiny sounds inside the RV, my heartbeat, the faint hum of the fridge compressor, feel impossibly loud. I didn't trust that silence. Nothing about this creature suggested randomness or retreat. If it had stopped making noise, it meant something else had begun. I waited. 30 seconds. A minute. Maybe more. My internal clock had shattered somewhere in the panic. Then a faint thump came from beneath me, under the RV. I scrambled to my feet instantly, his heart vaulting into my throat. The thump was followed by another, then a slow, dragging movement. Something large shifted under the rear axle, shaking the cabinets with a dull rattle. Dear God, it's crawling under. I steadied myself against the counter, forcing my breathing into something quieter, slower, less revealing. Whatever it was doing, scenting the tires, rubbing against the undercarriage, maybe even listening, it moved with purpose. The RV dipped slightly to the right as its weight shifted underneath, metal bolts groaning. Then a sound unlike anything I'd heard yet, a vocalization, low, resonant, and layered, like two tones at once. One deep and guttural, vibrating through the floor, the other higher, almost like a whisper carried through a hollow bone. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't a call. It sounded like communication, a signal. My stomach twisted. If it was signaling, then a branch snapped deep in the forest. Not close, but close enough. Another snapped farther away. Then another. No. There wasn't just one. The creature under the RV froze. The forest quieted in response. Every nerve in my body pulled tight, as if my entire system were bracing for impact. The creature beneath me shifted direction, crawling back toward the rear bumper with surprising speed. The RV rocked slightly as it emerged from underneath. Silent at first, then with deliberate footfalls moving toward the tree line. Not charging, not hunting, retreating. Retreating because something bigger or something else had answered its signal. Cold fear spread through me in a way that felt chemical, like poison. If the thing outside wasn't the apex predator, what had answered it? Branches cracked again, closer this time, a rhythmic pattern. One snap, two snaps, pause. Three snaps, not random, a sequence, a call and response. The creature that had stalked me all night let out a soft chuffing sound, almost submissive, and then melted into the forest, its massive shape swallowed by the darkness as though it had never existed. I didn't move, couldn't move. My mind scrambled to process what I had just witnessed. Whatever nightmare had been circling my RV, breathing against the windows, tapping along my walls, had been afraid. And if it was afraid, then the forest held something worse. The silence that followed was suffocating. No wind, no insects, no rustle of nocturnal life, just a vast, oppressive quiet. Then I saw them. Lights. Not flashlights, not lanterns, more like faint, pale glows, moonlight condensed into orbs moving between the trees, at first slow, then faster, weaving behind trunks, dipping in and out of view. My breath froze. There were 4 of them, maybe 5, each one spaced evenly apart, gliding in a formation that looked intentional, organized. They moved without sound, without hesitation, without any of the awkward vertical bobbing that human footsteps produce. The light wasn't bright either, more like a dim, milky luminescence, just enough to outline their paths. What are you? My mouth moved, but no sound came out. They spread out, drifting across the edges of the campground like phantoms checking boundary lines. Their glow grew slightly stronger whenever they slowed near fallen logs or thick brush, as if they were searching or tracking or communicating with the environment itself. Then one of the lights stopped, dead stop, right across from my RV. It turned, and in that faint glow I saw the outline. Not human, not even close, tall, too tall. Narrow, elongated limbs, a head slightly bowed as if its neck were longer than it should be. The pale sphere of light wasn't floating, it was emanating from the creature's chest. My blood iced over. The creature faced the RV for a long, unbearable moment. I stood still, holding my breath so tightly my chest ached. It didn't approach, it didn't call out, it didn't move closer. It simply stood there, watching, as if evaluating whether the thing that had harassed me earlier had left anything worth examining. The flare gun felt small in my hand, pathetic, pointless. I knew without doubt, firing it would either attract all of them or be seen as a threat I wouldn't survive. The glowing chest creature tilted its head once, slow and deliberate, and then it spoke. Not in words, not in a recognizable sound. The forest dimmed around it as the creature released a low vibrational hum, deep, layered, resonant. It pulsed through the air like a wave, rattling the aluminum skin of my RV, coursing through my bones, igniting something primal in the back of my mind. My vision blurred for a second. My balance faltered. The hum faded. The creature turned away. The lights moved deeper into the forest again, fading one by one until the last glow vanished behind the thick trunks. I didn't realize I'd been gripping the flare gun so tightly until it slipped from my trembling fingers and clattered to the floor. I sank onto the bench, shaking uncontrollably. The first creature, the one that had circled me, touched the RV, mimicked human behavior, was terrifying. But those glowing beings, they were something else entirely. Something older. Something organized, something that didn't hide, and if they were patrolling the forest tonight, then something had drawn them out. Something had made them search. And God help me, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been the reason they came. For a long time after the lights disappeared into the forest, I didn't move. I couldn't move. My body felt locked in place, as if the hum the creature emitted had stunned me into a half-frozen state. My hands remained open on my knees, palms upward, fingers trembling as though they were still holding the flare gun. Eventually, sensation returned, first to my legs, then to my arms, then to my chest, which finally remembered how to expand and pull in air again. The RV around me settled into its natural nighttime quiet, the faint ticking of the cooling metal merging with the soft whoosh of the heater kicking on. It should have felt comforting, familiar, human. It didn't. It felt borrowed. As though the safety inside this thin shell of fiberglass and aluminum wasn't really mine anymore. As though the forest had pressed its claim on me the moment those glowing figures turned their attention toward my home. I forced myself to move. One small action, then another. I picked up the flare gun and set it gently on the dinette. I checked the door locks again. I checked the windows. I checked them twice, maybe 3 times. My brain was trying to rebuild structure where structure had collapsed. The world outside was no longer familiar terrain. It was an intelligence, a presence, and it had noticed me. I pressed a shaking hand to my forehead, trying to steady myself. Sleep was a distant fantasy. My nerves felt electrified, every sense tuned too sharply to the environment around me. But exhaustion crept in anyway, seeping into the spaces between the fear. A heavy, unwanted weight. Maybe if I lay down, just to rest my eyes, no. Sleeping now felt like volunteering to be prey. Still, I couldn't stay on my feet much longer. My legs felt hollow, weak from adrenaline. I moved to the driver's seat and sat there, keeping my eye level high, keeping the entire cabin in view. The RV's headlights were off, but the faint ambient glow from the moon filtered in through the corner of the windshield where the shade didn't quite meet the frame. That smudged handprint still gleamed faintly, its streaks catching the moonlight in warped, oily lines. I stared at it for a long time, letting the reality of it settle. That happened. That was real. There's no undoing that. I leaned my forehead against the steering wheel and let out a long breath that trembled the whole way out. Hours passed. Maybe. Or maybe it was minutes stretched thin by fear. My sense of time dissolved completely, replaced by the shallow rhythm of hypervigilance. But eventually, something changed. Not outside. Inside me. A new sensation crept in, soft at first, then growing, an urge, a pull, like a thread running from the center of my chest out into the forest, tightening with each passing second. No, this isn't real. This is trauma. This is fear making you hallucinate. This is the urge sharpened, a direction formed, not vague, not metaphorical, specific. It wasn't telling me to run or to hide or to open a door. It was more gravitational, like something out there was calling to me in a silent, visceral way. My jaw tightened. No, I whispered. I'm not going out there. The RV creaked. Just the frame settling, nothing more. But my breath hitched anyway. Something deep in my brain, some old animal instinct part, told me that staying inside wasn't as safe as I'd believed, that the forest wasn't done with me, that whatever had come earlier wasn't the climax of the night, it was the prologue. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to break the feeling, but the pull only intensified. Not painful, not aggressive, just insistent. like a whisper at the base of my skull. Come. I jolted upright, my heart hammering again. The word hadn't been spoken, but I felt it, felt the shape of it, the intention. No, I whispered again, louder this time. Leave me alone. A cold wave washed through me. The forest outside responded, not audibly, but in pressure. The air grew denser, heavier. The RV seemed to breathe inward, its thin walls contracting with the weight of something vast. The pine branches outside shivered faintly, though there was no wind. This wasn't a creature anymore. This was the forest itself shifting, a subtle, silent rearranging. Something was coming back. My heart dropped. The glowing chest beings hadn't left because the threat was gone. They had left because their patrol had ended, because their search had failed, and now something else was returning to take their place. A soft step landed outside. Close. Too close. Then another. Then a slow, dragging sound around the back corner of the RV. My pulse erupted. Oh, God. The dragging sound stopped near the rear window. I stared at the shade, afraid to blink. The shape that slowly pressed against it was different from the earlier silhouette. Taller, broad enough to fill the entire frame. The shade bulged inward slightly. A slow exhale fogged the glass behind it. My knees weakened. It wasn't the first creature. It wasn't one of the glowing ones. This presence was heavier, older, almost like authority. The air in the RV thickened, pressing into my lungs. Another knock came, but not like before, not playful, not exploratory. 3 deliberate, heavy knocks. The tone vibrated the entire RV, rattling the cupboards. My bones felt the shock more than my ears. I stood frozen, caught between terror and something I hadn't expected, recognition. Not as in I knew the creature, but as though it knew me. A shadow slid past the back window, then along the passenger side. The creature moved slowly, circling with deliberation, its steps too heavy to mimic anything human now. Each footfall felt like a weight dropped into the earth, sending vibrations through the RV floor. It paused at the main door. My breath halted. Something pressed against the door from outside, not with force, just with presence. The door flexed inward slightly, hinges creaking. I jumped back, clutching the flare gun so hard my knuckles throbbed. And then it spoke. Not in a growl, not in the layered hum of the glowing beings. This voice scraped through the air like 2 stones dragged together. Deep, coarse, ragged. Not language, but shaped sound. An attempt, a primitive echo of speech. My stomach dropped into my shoes. It wasn't random. It was trying to say something. I backed away, shaking my head. No, don't. The sound came again, louder, the syllables more deliberate, more formed. It hit me all at once. It was trying to say my name. Micah. My breath burst out in a sharp cry, and the flare gun almost slipped from my grasp. The doorframe shuddered as the creature leaned harder into it, as if reacting to my fear. The urge, the pull, tightened in my chest so sharply I staggered backward. It wanted me outside. It was calling me. Not as prey, but as something else, something chosen. My legs backed me all the way toward the bedroom, but it didn't matter where I moved. The creature followed my position, tracking me through the metal walls. It knew exactly where I was, and it wasn't leaving this time. The RV went silent. Then, with a low, rumbling breath, the creature's hand wrapped around the door handle, and it began to turn. The metallic click of the door handle turning sliced straight through my spine. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. Every cell in my body locked into place as the handle dipped another impossible fraction of an inch downward. It shouldn't have been able to turn at all, not with the deadbolt latched. But the deadbolt didn't matter to something with hands that could wrap around a window frame. The handle twitched again, this time harder, like the creature was testing the mechanics, learning them. My throat tightened as the pull inside my chest sharpened again, like a hook embedded beneath my ribs. Not pain, not compulsion, something more subtle, more dangerous. Curiosity laced with a sick recognition. It was calling to me, and some part of me, some part I didn't recognize was answering. No, I whispered. No, you're not getting in. You're not. The handle jerked violently. The door flexed inward 3 inches before the deadbolt slammed it back into place with a snap. The frame shuddered. The hinges groaned. Dust shook loose from the upper cabinets. My own legs nearly gave out. The thing outside exhaled, a deep, frustrated rumble that vibrated through the walls like a warning or a promise. I stumbled backward into the bedroom, gripping the flare gun with both hands now. My arms trembled so badly it took all the strength I had to keep them raised. I couldn't take my eyes off the door, not even for a second. The handle turned again, slow this time, deliberate. A taunt, as if to show me it understood exactly how the mechanism worked, how close it was. A scraping sound followed, metal against metal. I realized with a cold jolt it was running its claw or fingernail along the seam of the door, tracing the outline of the lock, mapping it, learning it. Oh God. The words barely slipped out. The scraping stopped, then footsteps, heavy, measured. The creature moved around the RV, each step a seismic pulse in the soil. I tracked the movements through vibration alone, the way you might feel an approaching train long before you hear it. One step paused by the window next to my bed. The blackout shade fluttered, not from wind, from breath. Slow, heavy. The pain fogged faintly, the temperature in the room dipping several degrees in response. I clapped a hand over my mouth, shaking uncontrollably. Every instinct inside me screamed to run, to flee out the back emergency exit, to sprint blindly into the forest, even if it meant dying in the dark. But the urge pulling from the forest was stronger. It tugged at me, whispering not words but intentions. It wanted me outside. It expected me outside. The creature outside exhaled again, fogging the window, and my knees buckled. I collapsed onto the mattress, hands shaking so hard the flare gun clattered against the sheets. It let out a low, rumbling growl. Not hostile, not hungry, reproachful, as if disappointed. I forced myself to look at the silhouette behind the shade. It wasn't a clean outline, its anatomy still defied logic, but I could make out the slope of its shoulder, the width of its chest, the elongated angles that would never belong to any animal or human. It leaned closer. Something brushed the window, light like a fingertip or knuckle tracing a shape. No, not a shape. My name, Micah. I choked back a sob and scrambled away from the bed, moving into the hallway between the kitchen and the driver's seat. The creature followed my movement instantly, its shadow shifting, steps matching me perfectly on the outside. It knocked once on the wall, then twice, then 3 times. The same sequence I'd heard from the glowing beings earlier in the forest. My stomach flipped. They weren't separate. They weren't unrelated. This creature was using their pattern, either as a challenge, a warning, or a response. But which one? The knocking stopped abruptly, replaced by a sound I hadn't heard from it yet, something like a deep rolling vibration building in its chest. A warning, a call, a statement, or a summon. The forest answered, not with the lights, with something worse. A far-off rumble echoed through the trees. Not thunder, a movement, a shifting, like several massive bodies pushing through dense underbrush. Slow, synchronized, purposeful. The creature outside stiffened. It moved away from the RV in 2 long strides, pausing about 15 feet out. I inched toward the windshield, lifting the corner of the shade just enough to see. The creature stood tall under the moonlight, taller than any human could be. Its limbs were too long, its back hunched slightly in a way that suggested strength, not deformity. The texture of its skin wasn't smooth. It looked rough, bristled, mottled like bark. It wasn't a cryptid from a campfire story. It was something ancient, something feral, something that existed without a name. The rumbling from the forest drew closer. The creature turned its head toward the sound, chest expanding in a low, guttural breath. The air around it shimmered faintly, almost like heat rising from asphalt. And then a second creature appeared between the trees, glowing chest, silent, tall. The orb of light at its sternum glowed gently, pulsing faintly with the rhythm of a heartbeat. My breath caught. A third figure emerged behind it, then a fourth. The glowing beings formed a semicircle several yards away facing the first creature. Their posture wasn't aggressive, not immediately, but the tension rolling off them was unmistakable. The first creature, the one that had stalked me all night, let out a sharp, guttural bark. The glowing beings responded with a synchronized vibration that made the RV's walls quiver. A confrontation, a ritual, a territorial struggle. I didn't know. The first creature took a step backward toward my RV, as if claiming me. The glowing ones pulsed brighter in response. My skin prickled as the air between them crackled, the faintest static charge brushing against my arms. This wasn't about me as a threat. I was a boundary, a reason, a focal point, a catalyst. My stomach dropped as the truth hit me. The first creature hadn't been hunting me. It had been selecting me. For what, I had no idea. But the glowing ones clearly disapproved. The standoff escalated. The first creature's back arched, shoulders rising, its limbs extending in a way that defied normal musculature. The glowing beings responded by dimming their lights in unison, then flaring them bright in a single flash that turned the trees into skeletal silhouettes. The flare wasn't meant for me. It was a warning to the first creature. The air split in a crackling wave as the forest seemed to hold its breath. I backed away from the windshield slowly, the flare gun shaking in my hand. My heart pounded so fast I felt faint. Whatever was happening outside was far beyond me, beyond anything I could understand or interfere with. But then, the first creature turned its head toward my RV, toward me, and its mouth opened slowly. Not to roar, not to growl, but to speak. A low, gravelly approximation of human language scraped through its throat. Micah. The glowing beings surged forward in unison. The first creature bolted toward my RV, and every instinct inside me screamed, "Run!" The creature sprinting toward my RV wasn't running the way an animal runs. Its movement was too direct, too purposeful, more like a falling tree aimed with intention. Its limbs bent at angles they shouldn't, rejecting the logic of joints altogether. Every stride devoured distance in a way that made the air ripple behind it. My body reacted before my mind could catch up. I lunged toward the driver's seat, slamming my knee against the center console as I clawed for the keys. My fingers fumbled over everything: cup holders, dash switches, the rubber edge of the steering wheel, before I finally curled around the lanyard. I ripped the keys out of the holder and jammed them into the ignition. The RV roared to life. Headlights exploded outward in a harsh white beam, and in that frozen second of illumination, I saw the creature launch. Not toward the forest, not toward the glowing beings, toward me, toward the driver's side window. Its shoulder collided with the glass so hard the entire RV rocked on its suspension. The windshield cracked in a lightning bolt pattern. Shards glittered across the dashboard. I screamed reflexively and hunched over the wheel. The glowing chest beings surged forward. Their movements were silent, but the air pulsed with each advance, pressure waves radiating outward like the force of thunder. Their chests brightened again, this time not as a warning, but as a command. The creature slammed the window again, claws raking across the cracked surface in long, shrieking lines. I didn't have time to think. I stomped the gas. The RV lurched forward violently. The creature slid off the door with a guttural snarl, skidding across the gravel. The glowing beings moved faster now, closing in around me, not attacking but funneling, guiding. They were herding me away. The forest erupted behind me, branches snapping, ground shaking, something enormous barreling after me through the dark. I gripped the wheel so tightly the tendons in my wrist screamed. The headlights carved frantic slices through the trees as the RV jumped along the rough forest road, the suspension groaning. I couldn't see the creature, but I could hear it. Heavy, rhythmic impacts closing in again. I kept my eyes locked on the shrinking stretch of road ahead. The beams caught trunks, rocks, brush, everything except safety. Then, a shadow flashed across the driver's window. The creature had bounded onto the slope beside me, running parallel now, keeping pace. Its limbs propelled it with horrifying ease, its torso twisting in unnatural angles as it reached toward the RV. Its claws scraped along the metal exterior, sparks exploding in the dark. I panicked and jerked the wheel away from the slope. The RV nearly tipped. Tires dug into loose soil. I swerved back, struggling to maintain the road, if it could even be called a road anymore. The glowing beings appeared again ahead of me, 3 of them. Their bodies illuminated the trunks in faint pulses. They didn't move out of the way. They didn't raise their limbs to stop me. They simply stood, waiting, guiding. I aimed between them. The forest opened into a narrow corridor of trees, and the RV shot through. The glowing beings vanished behind me, swallowed by the dark. But the creature didn't. It roared. A feral, furious sound, then lunged again. The impact slammed into the rear quarter panel, metal crunching. The RV fishtailed. I fought the wheel with everything I had, heart pounding so hard it vibrated through my jaw. "Come on! Come on! Come on!" I screamed at the engine. The tires regained contact with firmer ground. Gravel spat out behind me like shrapnel. I couldn't spare even a second to look back, but the thudding footsteps didn't fade. It was still there, still chasing, still calling my name in that broken gravel voice. Mick. Ah! The sound tore through my nerves. My vision blurred with adrenaline and exhaustion and fear that had no place left to hide in my body. I slammed the headlights to high beam and watched the road blur into streaks. The RV bounced so violently I kept getting thrown forward against the seatbelt. My teeth clacked together, hard enough to sting. And then I saw it. A clearing. An actual open clearing. Moonlit, flat, familiar. The campground. My campsite. I burst through the tree line, gravel scattering like exploding hail. The creature broke out from the shadows behind me, its body silhouetted against the tree line, long and skeletal and horribly coordinated. I cut the wheel hard. The RV screeched as I spun it in a desperate half circle, headlights sweeping across the fire pit, the picnic table, my scattered gear on the ground. I grabbed the flare gun, not to threaten, to survive. I yanked open what was left of the driver's side window and aimed blindly into the dark. The creature burst through the clearing toward me. I pulled the trigger. A thunderous pop erupted, and the flare shot upward in a screaming arc of red fire. The blaze illuminated the entire campsite and the creature within it. For the first time, I saw it clearly. It wasn't just tall. It wasn't just twisted. Its body looked incomplete, as if something had taken pieces of several animals and forced them into a humanoid frame that rejected its own shape. Long limbs, bark-textured skin, patches of coarse hair, ribs visible even under the strange armor-like plates across its chest. And the face. God. The face wasn't a face at all. Just ridges, angled bones, and two dimly reflective pits where eyes should have been. It flinched at the sudden blaze overhead, staggered back with a guttural growl. The flare ignited the treetops in a wash of light, turning the forest into a glowing red cavern. The creature recoiled farther, chest rising sharply. It wasn't afraid of the flare, it was reacting to what came next. A glow. Not red, white. Dozens of pulses ignited deeper in the forest. Then more behind them, then more. Not two or three glowing chest beings. Dozens. An entire procession emerged between the trunks, their chests pulsing like lanterns carried by silent, towering monks. They surrounded the clearing in a slow, synchronized advance, creating a ring of faint light around the creature. My breath caught. The creature wasn't the predator anymore. It was the hunted. It let out a furious snarl and lunged toward the tree line, but the glowing beings closed ranks, their chests flaring in unison. A wave of pressure rippled outward, forcing the creature back toward the center of the clearing, toward me, toward the RV. No, 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 I whispered, backing away. It slammed against the side of the RV again, claws scraping for purchase. It wasn't attacking me now, it was trying to escape, trying to get leverage. It was using me as cover. The glowing beings formed a tighter circle. One stepped forward, taller than the rest. Its chest glowed brighter, much brighter. The creature shrieked and leapt onto the RV roof. The entire rig bowed downward with its weight, the metal groaning as the roof dented under its claws. Dust rained from the ceiling interior. I scrambled backward toward the bedroom, clutching the flare gun with shaking hands, praying it somehow had another round. The glowing beings advanced again. The creature above me howled, and the RV roof buckled. The roof caved downward with a groaning crack, metal warping inches above my head. Insulation drifted into the air like slow falling snow. I stumbled backward until I hit the bedroom door frame. gripping it just to stay upright as the entire RV rocked under the creature's shifting weight. Its claws scraped along the aluminum skin, long, frantic strokes, as if it were trying to dig its way inside or claw its way out of something worse waiting outside. Every movement felt desperate, cornered, wild. The glowing chest beings tightened their circle around the campsite, their chests pulsing brighter and brighter, so intensely the shadows trembled. The tallest one stepped forward, the light swelling in its chest in a slow, rhythmic beat that I could feel in my own sternum. The air changed, it thickened, pressurized, alive. The creature above me roared in raw fury, the sound vibrating through the walls like a storm trapped in a tin can. I clamped my hands over my ears and crouched instinctively. The roar didn't sound like aggression anymore, it sounded like panic. Something primal struck me then. Whatever was above me, whatever had chased me, cornered me, tried to learn my name, was terrified of the beings surrounding us. The roof dented another full inch. A claw erupted through the metal, missing my shoulder by less than a foot. I threw myself sideways onto the bed, my heart pounding so hard I thought it might tear free. Another claw punched through. Then another. It wasn't attacking me. It was trying to anchor itself, trying to hold on, trying not to be taken. The tallest glowing being stepped closer, its chest flashing white, so bright the clearing shimmered like a snowfield under a rising sun. The others pulsed in perfect rhythm, forming a unified ring of pressure. The creature above me let out a low, trembling moan, a sound that barely resembled language but still held intent, a plea. The flare gun slipped from my shaking hands and hit the floor with a soft thud. I stared upward, breath locked inside my chest as the glowing beings advanced their circle another step. Then the tallest one lifted its arm, long, thin, impossibly steady, and pointed directly at the RV. Not at me, at the creature perched above me. The pulsing lights intensified. The creature screamed. The RV shuddered violently as the thing climbed across the roof, its claws scrambling for any edge, any grip. The metal buckled with each desperate movement. I pressed myself into the far corner of the bed, hands over my head, waiting for the ceiling to split open. Then, the forest inhaled. I felt it, the trees, the soil, even the air pulled inward, as though something colossal had taken a breath around the clearing. The glowing beings extinguished their lights for a fraction of a second. Darkness swallowed everything. The creature above me froze. A single heartbeat, a single breath. Then, a blast of white erupted from the tallest being's chest, exploding outward in a wave. It wasn't heat, and it wasn't light. It was something thicker, heavier, like sound you could feel in your bones. The RV rocked violently as the creature was ripped off the roof. Dragged, not thrown. Dragged backward into the circle. Its claws screeched against the metal as it fought to stay attached, leaving long gouges across the roof. Then its grip slipped, and its body slammed onto the gravel outside. The earth shook with the impact. The glowing beings closed their formation. The creature writhed at the center, limbs twisting, spasming, trying to find purchase, trying to rise. But the pressure held it down, firm and absolute. The tallest being stepped toward it, its chest glowing with a steady, painful brightness. Something passed between them. Not words. Something older. I couldn't breathe, couldn't swallow, couldn't look away. The creature's body began to distort, not breaking, not tearing, but collapsing inward as if its own shape were unraveling. Its limbs curled, its torso folding into itself like fabric pulled into a tightening knot. Bones didn't snap. They compressed. Flesh didn't tear. It dissolved into itself. The glow intensified. I covered my eyes, but the light pressed straight through my hands. When it finally dimmed, the creature was gone. Completely. No body. No remains. Just a scorched circle of earth and a faint smell like burned cedar. The glowing being stood silently around the spot. My entire body shook uncontrollably as the tallest one turned and looked toward my RV. Not its head, exactly, because I still couldn't tell which direction its face pointed, but its attention, its awareness. Its focus shifted and centered directly on me. Its chest pulsed once, slow and deliberate. Not a threat, not a warning, something else. Permission? Farewell? Assessment? I didn't know. One by one, the other beings dimmed their chests and slipped back into the forest. Silent, fluid, disappearing between the trees like shadows moving through deeper shadows. The tallest lingered a moment longer. It raised its arm slightly, then let it fall back to its side. A gesture. Simple. Final. And then it too turned and vanished into the dark. The clearing was empty. Quiet returned. Not peaceful, not gentle, but hollow in the way only survivors recognize. I remained curled in the corner of the bed long after the lights were gone. My breathing came shallow, ragged, uneven. My muscles wouldn't unclench. Every nerve buzzed with leftover electricity. When I finally stood, my legs buckled twice before they held my weight. The RV interior looked as if a storm had passed through it. Dust everywhere. Bent ceiling panels, cracked window. The whole place smelled faintly of metal, ozone, and fear. It took all my strength to make myself open the door, to step outside to see the scorched circle in the center of my campsite, the place where the creature had been unmade. The forest was silent, not dead, not dormant, just watching, waiting to see if I understood. And I did. You don't survive something like that because you fought harder, or because you were faster, or even because you were lucky. You survive because something older than you decides you belong to the side of the living. I stood in that clearing, chest tight, heart unsteady, every breath a quiet miracle. Eventually, I walked back to the RV, turned the key, and rolled out of that forest without looking once in the mirrors. And here's the thing. People always ask what lesson I took from that night, what I learned, what I'd tell anyone else who chooses to camp alone in the wild corners of this country. It's simple. Trust the fear that doesn't feel like panic, the fear that feels like direction. There are things out there older than our maps, older than our rules, older than the comfort we pretend the wilderness owes us. Some of them hunt, some of them guard, some of them choose, and some of them, like the ones who saved me that night, hold the line between what wants us and what waits for us. I don't camp the same way anymore. I don't ignore unease. I don't dismiss instinct. And when I'm sitting by a fire at dusk and the woods go quiet all at once, I listen. Because the forest remembers me, and I remember it. And fear, real fear, isn't the enemy. It's the warning that keeps you alive. I've always thought of the road as a kind of sanctuary, a moving escape where the hum of the engine and the rhythm of the tires over asphalt can carry you away from the noise of the world. That night, though, that sanctuary became something else entirely. My Volkswagen van, aged, scratched, a little stubborn but dependable, was supposed to be my cocoon. I'd planned this trip for weeks, just me, the open highway, and a campground tucked somewhere in the northern reaches of Oregon, where the trees grow tall enough to blot out the stars and the air smells of damp pine and wet earth. I didn't expect it to be a test of my own courage. I pulled into the small clearing just after dusk, the headlights briefly illuminating a row of old RVs, their paint faded, their windows cloudy with years of neglect. The place had a name, scribbled in peeling letters on a wooden sign, Pine Hollow RV Park. But calling it a park felt generous. Most of the RVs were abandoned, their doors hanging on rusted hinges, tires sunk into the soil. There was an uncanny stillness, the kind that presses in on you from all sides, quiet but complete. My friend Mia, who'd driven with me for part of the trip but turned back earlier that day, had told me, "It looks like no one's here. It's perfect." At the time, I agreed. Now, as I parked the van near an old poplar tree, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was trespassing into some forgotten corner of the world. I started unloading, sleeping bags, lanterns, a few cans of food. Each sound I made, the zip of a bag, the clink of a metal cup, sounded absurdly loud in the dead air. The van's engine ticked down to silence, and for a moment I simply stood there, listening. There was the faint rustle of leaves, the distant snap of a branch, but no birds, no insects, no wind, just the dense, heavy quiet of a place untouched for years. My instincts told me to leave. But part of me, a stubborn, thrill-seeking part, urged me to stay. "You'll make a story out of this," I muttered to myself, though my voice sounded small, swallowed by the night. By the time I'd set up my small camp stove and started heating some soup, the air had thickened with an almost tangible sense of waiting. I could smell the damp wood, the iron tang of rust, and something else, something faint and sour that I couldn't place. It reminded me of decay, but not just organic decay. It was the kind of smell that seeps into your clothes, into your skin, and refuses to leave. I brushed it off as just old RVs, old soil, the smell of an abandoned place. The first hint that something was off came from the sound of movement behind me, a soft scraping like metal against metal, then a low, guttural cough that didn't belong to any animal I knew. My heart kicked in, sudden and harsh. I told myself it was a raccoon or a deer, maybe a branch being moved by the wind, but the wind hadn't moved for hours. I stayed still, gripping the handle of my thermos like a lifeline, ears straining in the thick silence. Whatever it was, it stopped when I stopped moving. The van felt suddenly protective, a barrier against whatever might be out there, but I realized I could no longer feel the ground beneath me in the same way. The earth seemed too still, too quiet. I tried to settle in, telling myself I needed rest. I crawled into the van, pulling the curtain across the small window so no light would escape. I could feel my own breathing in the tight space, hear the faint creak of the van settling into the uneven ground. And then I heard it again, a knock, soft, but deliberate. 3 taps like someone counting. I froze. My rational mind immediately offered explanations, a branch, a bird, but the taps came again, this time on the metal side of the van itself. Not random, deliberate. My first instinct was to peer through the curtains, but the darkness outside was total, the sort that feels like a physical weight pressing against your eyes. I whispered, "Hello?" No answer, just the echo of my own voice bouncing back. I considered leaving, but something rooted me in place, some combination of fear and stubborn pride. I told myself I was a storyteller, a chronicler of experiences, and that even if I didn't sleep tonight, I'd make it worth it. But the words sounded hollow in the thickening night. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. Time began to warp. Every sound outside, every snap of a branch or whisper of wind against the RVs became charged with meaning. I could feel eyes, though I couldn't see them, felt shapes moving in the darkness that weren't shadows of trees or old RVs. My mind tried to rationalize animals, neighbors, my imagination, but every rational thought was undercut by a creeping dread that had nothing to do with reason. Then a voice. Soft, low, almost a whisper, coming from somewhere between the van and the nearest abandoned RV. I couldn't make out words, just syllables that felt like warnings. I held my breath, straining, and it stopped. But the silence that followed was worse than the voice itself. It was expectant, patient, like the night had been waiting for me to notice. I realized I wasn't thinking in straight lines anymore. My senses were splitting, each alert, each tingling nerve screaming at me to leave, but the part of me that had always loved the thrill of camping in remote places kept me frozen. I felt like an intruder in someone else's memory, some place where the past had refused to fade. And then I understood. This place wasn't abandoned in the way I had thought. It was waiting. The first movement I could confirm with my eyes wasn't far off. Shadows that didn't match any tree or RV, shapes that flickered at the corner of my vision. I tried to tell myself it was fatigue, paranoia, but when one shadow moved closer, following the contour of the van like it was alive, I could no longer deny it. My pulse was a hammer in my chest. I thought about turning on the engine, fleeing down the dirt road, but something inside me, a strange, foolish curiosity, made me stop. I whispered my own name to ground myself. "Alex, stay calm." And then I saw it. A reflection in the van's side mirror, pale, almost translucent, like someone had pressed a hand against the other side of reality and left a mark. It wasn't human, not entirely, but it had the shape of a figure, and it was watching me. I don't remember deciding to leave. I just found myself starting the van, shaking hands on the wheel, the headlights cutting through the darkness. Whatever was out there stayed still for a moment, then retreated into the shadows of the abandoned RVs. I drove faster than I'd ever driven before, the engine screaming over the rough ground, tires throwing gravel into the night. Behind me, the silence resumed, but it was heavier now, as if the place itself was exhaling, disappointed I hadn't stayed. By the time I reached the highway, my body was trembling. The adrenaline faded slowly, replaced by a hollow exhaustion. I didn't stop until I reached the nearest town, a little cluster of lights and warmth, and even then the images lingered, the pale shape, the deliberate taps, the low whispers that had seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. I learned something that night. About fear, about intuition, about the way the road can carry you into places you were never meant to go, but also the way it can carry you back. And as I parked my van in the quiet driveway of my own home, I realized that camping isn't just about finding serenity in the wilderness. Sometimes it's about confronting the unease that follows you even into the open air. The memory didn't fade with the sunrise, didn't wither with distance. It became a warning and a lesson. There are places where the road feels wrong, where silence is not a gift, but a trap. And sometimes the only way to survive a story like that is to respect the whispers, to heed the warning even when curiosity claws at you. That's the thing about the road. It's not just a path, it's a mirror. It reflects the parts of you you've ignored, the instincts you've silenced. And if you're lucky, if you're wise, it will let you return, changed, aware, alive, carrying the story that no one else will ever believe. Even after I escaped Pine Hollow, the memory of that night clung to me like wet clothes. Every creak of my Volkswagen suspension, every sudden gust against the sliding door made my pulse spike. I told myself I was imagining it, that my brain had filled in the gaps with fear. But imagination doesn't leave fingerprints, doesn't leave the faint iron tang in the air, doesn't make the hairs on the back of your neck rise as though a cold hand is brushing them. Weeks later, curiosity drove me back. Not the same reckless curiosity, but a quiet, almost desperate need to understand what I had encountered. I returned in the middle of the day, sunlight spilling over the rusted RVs, painting everything in soft, forgiving colors. It looked different, innocuous, safe. And yet, when I stepped out of the van, the silence pressed against me immediately. I realized that safety is relative. The park hadn't changed. I had. I wandered between the RVs, the boards underfoot creaking in familiar, eerie rhythm. I noticed details I had missed before. Scorch marks on the side of one trailer, the faint outline of words scrawled on peeling paint, as if someone had tried to leave a message for anyone who might pass through. Don't stay. Simple, clear, my stomach turned. The thought had been a whisper in the night, a flicker of instinct I had ignored, and now it was written for me to see. I approached the RV that had seemed closest to the thing I saw, the one with the door barely hanging on its hinges. My reflection caught in a cracked window, distorted, fragmented. For a moment, I couldn't tell if the shape staring back at me was me at all. The hairs on my arms prickled and the familiar internal resistance rose like bile in my chest. I reminded myself this was just wood and glass. This was abandoned. This was safe. But as I reached out to touch the metal, the air shifted. A shiver ran through me. Not the normal shiver of cold, but one that seemed to pass through bone and nerve. And then I heard it again, the soft scraping, the low cough, almost human but wrong. I froze, breath caught in my chest, and for a moment I was back in that van, back in the night that felt eternal. I forced myself to step back, shaking my head. It's nothing. You're safe now, I whispered aloud. The words sounded hollow even to me. I moved toward the van, deciding to leave, and that's when I noticed the other RVs. The shadows between them weren't shadows. They were empty spaces where light didn't touch, darkness that moved as though it had its own weight, its own will. They shifted when I looked and froze when I blinked. I realized then that Pine Hollow wasn't abandoned in the conventional sense. It was dormant, waiting. I didn't know for what, but I understood, viscerally, that it had watched me before, had tested me. The taps, the whispers, the figure, they were a prelude, an assessment. I had passed, barely, but the park had marked me. I returned home, but something had followed me. At first, it was subtle, the faint creak of the van, even when it was parked, shadows at the corner of my vision when I closed my eyes. Then it escalated, the low whispers at night, just enough to make me doubt whether I was awake or dreaming. Sleep became a luxury I couldn't afford, and the line between vigilance and paranoia blurred. I started keeping a journal, documenting the experience in detail. Names, times, locations, sensations, anything that could anchor me in reality. I knew rationality alone couldn't explain what I had felt, but writing helped me maintain some control. I realized that fear has layers. There's the fear of immediate danger, the fear of what's unseen, and the deeper fear, the one that burrows into your memory and refuses to leave. That's the kind of fear Pine Hollow had given me. Months later, I returned again, not to confront the park, but to understand myself. I parked at the edge, watching from a distance, observing without engaging. The van felt like a shield, a reminder of the boundary between me and whatever lurked there. And yet, the park was alive in its silence. The RVs seemed to breathe, the shadows stretching like fingers over the cracked asphalt. It wasn't the place itself that was threatening. It was the way it forced you to confront your own perception, to face the instincts you ignore. I started to notice patterns. The figure that appeared wasn't always in the same place. The taps came at irregular intervals. The whispers seemed to shift in pitch and tone as if mimicking my thoughts. It was testing me, learning me, shaping me. I felt a twisted sense of respect for that. Pine Hollow wasn't malicious in the conventional sense. It was a teacher, harsh, cryptic, unforgiving. It forced awareness, demanded caution, and punished hubris. One evening, sitting in the van just beyond the tree line, I understood something else. The fear wasn't just about survival, it was about humility, about acknowledging that some spaces, no matter how familiar or mapped, belong to forces larger than our understanding. The park wasn't a haunted tourist trap, not a gimmick. It was a reminder. Curiosity without respect can be dangerous. It's the lesson every road trip whispers in subtle ways, if only you're listening. I didn't leave immediately. I stayed until the sky darkened, until the van's lights barely pierced the gathering gloom. And then, as I drove away, I allowed myself a slow exhale, a release of tension that had built over months. But I knew the memory would follow. That part of me would always hear the taps in the silence, the whispers in the dark, the shape that pressed at the edge of perception. And I accepted it, not as a curse, but as a companion. Proof that the road, with all its beauty and danger, changes you. Back home, I shared the story with friends cautiously. Some laughed, some rolled their eyes. Few understood. But that didn't matter. The lesson wasn't for them. It was for me. To trust my instincts, to respect boundaries, to acknowledge the weight of silence and the intelligence of the unseen. Volkswagen camping is often painted as freedom, the open road, the promise of the night sky, the comfort of the familiar inside the van, but it's also an invitation to pay attention, to confront what you cannot name, to leave wiser than you arrived. Since that night, I've approached every trip differently. I scout more carefully, I listen harder, I sleep lightly when the air feels too still, and yet I chase the thrill, because there's a unique clarity in fear, a sharpness of awareness you cannot find in comfort. Fear teaches you how to move through the world with attention, with courage, with humility. And Pine Hollow, in all its abandoned, haunted quiet, taught me more than any smooth highway or friendly campground ever could. Even now, when I drive down a lonely forest road, when the sun dips below the horizon and the van's engine hums steadily beneath me, I feel the echo of those taps, the brush of unseen eyes. And I smile. Not because I'm unafraid, but because I know I survived, because I understand, because the road is alive, and I am awake to it. And every time I hear the faintest whisper of danger or uncertainty, I remember, it's not the threat that matters, it's your response, your respect, your willingness to listen, because the road will always offer stories, some beautiful, some terrifying. And if you carry them wisely, if you learn from them without arrogance, They will shape you into a traveler who sees more than the asphalt beneath your wheels, who notices the shadows and the silence, and who leaves the road better than they found it. The following spring, I returned one last time, not out of curiosity, not even out of courage, but out of a need for closure. The memory of that night had been gnawing at me, lingering like a shadow that moved when I wasn't looking. Pine Hollow RV Park had become more than a place. It had become a question I couldn't ignore, a story I needed to complete before it consumed me in half-truths and imagination. I arrived in the late afternoon, when the sun still hung low between the trees, slanting light through the thick pines in long golden shafts. The place seemed almost peaceful now. The RVs, corroded and tired, bathed in sunlight, were almost picturesque. But I had learned to look past appearances. I knew that beneath this calm, beneath the gleaming surfaces and forgiving light, something had waited for me, something that could sense the cracks in my attention, the hesitation in my steps. I parked my van a safe distance from the central cluster of RVs and stepped out slowly. Each footfall on the soft soil sounded sharp, deliberate, aware. I reminded myself to breathe, to stay present, to observe without reacting before understanding. I noticed the little details I'd missed before. Faint tire tracks pressed into the dirt, a line of moss creeping along the base of one RV, the hollow echo of the wind through broken windows. Nothing overt, nothing malicious, but everything patient, waiting, alive in its own quiet way. I walked toward the RV that had frightened me most, the one with the door hanging precariously, the one that had held that strange, unnameable presence. I stopped just short of it, studying its weathered exterior, the faded streaks of rust that ran like veins. I ran my hand lightly along the side, feeling the cold metal under my fingertips. It was real, yes, but it wasn't attacking, it wasn't chasing, it simply existed, as it had all along, testing, observing, marking the edges of its domain. I remembered the taps, the whispers, the figure in the mirror, and I realized something profound. Pine Hollow hadn't been trying to hurt me. It had been trying to teach me something I wasn't ready to understand in the dark. It had forced me to confront myself, my fears, my instincts, my hubris. The isolation, the silence, the feeling of being watched, it had all been a mirror, reflecting not just the environment, but the parts of me I'd ignored. I set up my camp again, carefully, with intention rather than recklessness. I lit a small fire, letting the smoke curl into the sky, carrying with it the residue of my anxiety. I listened to the wind, to the subtle creaks and groans of the RVs, to the distant call of a bird. For the first time, the sounds didn't press against me like threats. They were part of the rhythm, part of the ecosystem of the place. I wasn't intruding. I was participating in its story. That night, as darkness fell and the van's lantern cast a warm glow, I finally let myself sit with the fear rather than run from it. I let myself acknowledge it fully, the creeping unease, the racing heart, the imagined figures at the edge of vision. And then I let it settle. It was still there, yes, but it had a shape, a boundary. It was no longer a shapeless terror lurking in the periphery. It was a teacher. It was a reminder. I slept lightly in the van, listening to the park breathe around me. When I awoke before dawn, the first pale light spilling between the trees, I felt a strange, profound peace. The figure, the taps, the whispers, they didn't vanish, but they became part of the landscape of experience rather than a threat. I understood that some fears are not meant to be conquered in the moment. They are meant to be carried, examined, integrated, so that when the next road bends into darkness, you know how to move with awareness and respect. As I drove away from Pine Hollow that morning, I noticed how the light transformed the forest. What had seemed menacing in the dark was now complex, layered, alive in ways I hadn't seen before. The RVs, rusted and empty, were still there, but they were markers of time, patience, and endurance, rather than harbingers of danger. I thought of the miles I would travel from here, the countless highways and back roads ahead, and I knew that fear would follow me, but in a useful way. Fear would sharpen me, focus me, remind me that every bend in the road carries potential for wonder and caution alike. Back home, I reflected on the lessons Pine Hollow had impressed upon me. It wasn't just about avoiding danger, it was about listening to intuition, respecting spaces that belong to histories we cannot see, understanding that courage is not the absence of fear, but the willingness to act in spite of it, and the humility to leave when the lesson is done. The road had taught me again and again that every trip carries a story, and that the most meaningful stories are the ones that test you to your core. Now, whenever I pack the van for a trip, I carry those memories with me, not as a burden, but as a compass. I feel the echo of taps, the hint of whispers, the pressure of eyes that aren't there, and I move forward anyway, aware, alert, alive. And I share the story because even though we'll truly understand, it is a caution, a guide, a spark for anyone willing to travel with honesty. The road does not forgive ignorance. The road does not reward arrogance, but the road does illuminate the soul for those who are willing to see clearly, to feel deeply, to listen to the subtleties that whisper beneath the obvious. Fear, I have learned, is not a punishment. It is a teacher. And Pine Hollow is the teacher who waits patiently for those brave or foolish enough to enter, testing their resolve, measuring their respect, and giving them the opportunity to emerge changed, stronger, wiser, humble, and alive. I often tell myself as the wheels hum beneath me and the van carries me into dusk that there are no mistakes on the road. There are only choices and consequences and stories that shape who you are. That night at Pine Hollow, that encounter with the unseen forced me to choose awareness over ignorance, respect over arrogance, presence over distraction. And in doing so, it gave me something I hadn't expected: clarity. So I drive, always a little slower on the lonely back roads, always attentive to the sounds of the trees, the whispers of the wind, the strange stillness in abandoned spaces. I let the fear linger, let it guide me, let it teach me, because the road will always offer more than asphalt and scenery. It offers truth, the truth of the world around you, and the truth of yourself. And if you listen carefully, if you honor the quiet and respect the spaces you enter, you just might make it home. Not untouched, not untested, but alive, changed, aware, and carrying the story you were meant to carry. That is the road's gift. That is the lesson of Pine Hollow. And that is why I will always, forever, hear the echo of those taps, feel the brush of unseen eyes, and know that fear is not the end. It is the beginning of understanding, courage, and life fully lived. I always believe that the places we choose to camp carry memories, old ones, heavy ones, some that stick to the dirt long after the fires stop burning. But nothing prepared me for the truth hiding beneath the soil of that quiet little RV park off Route 41, the one locals now pretend never existed. And nothing in my 39 years on this earth could have warned me how those memories would reach out, like fingers from the ground to pull me in. My name is Elias Hart, and before that night, before that discovery, I'd have told you I was just an ordinary guy who enjoyed driving his RV across the country to clear his mind and escape the noise of my life. But I've learned that sometimes the places we choose don't just mirror our internal struggles, they sharpen them. They reveal things we've kept buried. And if you're not careful, those places can swallow you whole. I had been traveling through the Midwest after a rough winter. I won't sugarcoat it. I was running from the loneliness that crept into my life after losing my father, running from the silence in my RV that felt louder than any thunderstorm, running from the instinctive feeling that I had been standing still for too long. So when I heard about a cheap, quiet RV park near the Wisconsin-Illinois line, a place called Maple Hollow RV Retreat, I took it as a sign, somewhere peaceful, somewhere off the beaten path, somewhere I could gather myself again. But that's the thing about places people call quiet. They're usually quiet because no one wants to talk about them. When I pulled in just before dusk, the first thing I noticed was the absence of sound. No laughter, no engines, no footsteps on gravel, just wind moving through leaves that refused to rustle, almost like the trees themselves were holding their breath. The park was tucked into a wooded hollow, lined with old maple trees that twisted toward the sky like they were growing away from something underground. There were 8 RV pads. 7 were empty. The only other vehicle belonged to the park manager, an older man named Levi, with shoulders that slumped like he carried the weight of the entire hollow on his back. His eyes stayed fixed on mine, just long enough to confirm I was real and not another ghost from the past. This place clearly wanted to keep buried. He checked me in with a voice barely above a whisper, telling me about the bathhouse, the trails, the firewood, the typical campground rules. But there was something else, something he didn't say, a sentence trapped behind his teeth. Only later did I realize that the sentence he wouldn't say was the most important one. That first night, I set up camp, cooked something simple on my stove, and sat outside to let the quiet settle in. The air felt colder than it should have for late spring. My breath fogged slightly when I exhaled. I told myself it was normal, but my instincts knew better. Instincts always know before logic catches up. As I sat there, watching the fog drift through the trees, I noticed a shape between the trunks. Just tall enough to be human, just still enough to be wrong. It stood far off near the tree line, unmoving, its outline blurring in the haze. For a moment, my heartbeat thudded in my ears, drowning out everything else. My first thought was that someone else was camping here. But there was no RV, no tent, no fire. And the figure didn't sway, didn't shift its weight, didn't acknowledge my presence at all. When I blinked, it was gone. I told myself it was a shadow, a trick of the fog, a mind too ready to find meaning in shapes that weren't there. My father used to say the human brain was wired to make patterns out of chaos, but the longer I sat in that silence, the more I felt the hollow pressing against my mind like a hand flattening a page. I tried to shake it off by walking to the bathhouse, but on the way I passed a patch of dirt near pad number 3, dark, disturbed soil, like something had been recently dug up and covered again. The ground there dipped just slightly, forming a shallow depression. It was the only spot in the entire park where the grass refused to grow, and the air above it felt warm, almost breathing. I didn't linger. Back in my RV, I tried to settle down for the night, but around 12:30 a.m., I heard something. At first, it sounded like a distant knocking, slow, irregular, muffled. Not the metallic ping of cooling pipes or the settling groans of an RV. This was heavier, almost like someone rapping their knuckles against the earth itself. 3 knocks. A pause, then 2 more. I sat up, pulse hammering, listening. The knocks returned, this time closer, traveling from somewhere deep in the woods toward my RV pad. I flicked off my interior lights, letting the darkness swallow me, and pressed my ear to the wall. The sound passed by the RV, slow and deliberate, then stopped near pad number 3. Silence stretched long enough to become a weight on my chest. Then came a sound I never want to hear again, a soft, wet exhale. Not animal, not wind. A human breath rising from the dirt, just loud enough to carry through the fog. My entire body locked up. Rationality begged me to stay inside, to stay quiet, to wait until morning. But something stronger than rationality, some deep primal instinct, pulled me to the window. I wiped a circle in the condensation and peered out. That same shadowed figure stood beside pad number 3 again. Only now, its outline was clearer, sharper. It looked like a man, shoulders hunched, head tilted slightly upward, listening to something beneath the ground as if waiting for an answer. And then, not it turned, not its head, its entire body rotated toward me in one slow, unnatural motion. My breath hitched, every nerve fired. I stumbled back from the window when, hitting my shoulder against the cabinet, barely stopping myself from cursing out loud. The fog outside thickened, swallowing the figure again. But I knew in that moment that whatever it wasn't another camper. And it wasn't lost. It was searching. That night, sleep never came. I sat in the dinette with a flashlight in hand, waiting for dawn. Every creak of the forest felt amplified, every gust of wind like the inhale of something unseen. The knocks didn't return, but I swear at least twice I heard dragging footsteps moving through the dirt, slow and scraping, just beyond my window, and each time the air temperature dropped enough for frost to form along the edges of the glass. By sunrise, the fog had thinned, and the hollow looked deceptively normal again. Birds chirped, leaves stirred, even the patch of disturbed soil near pad number 3 looked less ominous in the daylight. If someone had asked me then why I didn't just pack up and leave, I would have said I needed answers. But the truth is, something about that place had already hooked itself into me, like the hollow didn't want me to leave until its secret was finally told. When I saw Levi later that morning, he looked at me with the kind of expression men wear when they recognize fear someone else isn't ready to admit. Rubbing the back of his neck, he muttered, "You saw something, didn't you?" I didn't answer. I didn't need to. He exhaled sharply, like he'd been holding that breath for years. "There are things around here," he said quietly. "Things better left alone. But I wasn't leaving it alone. Not after last night. Not after hearing something beneath the dirt try to breathe. Not after seeing the figure that, whether man or memory, was clearly waiting for me to follow. I should have left that morning. Any reasonable person would have. But reason doesn't operate cleanly when fear mixes with curiosity. It becomes something murkier, something that pulls you toward the very thing you should be running from. That's the part people never talk about when they share scary RV stories. The pull. The way a place can make you feel like you owe it your attention. I told myself I only wanted to understand what had happened the night before. Maybe it was a drifter. Maybe Levi knew about someone squatting in the woods and didn't want to scare off the few guests he had left. Maybe the noises came from underground pipes or burrowing animals or any number of rational explanations. But there was one truth I couldn't shake. Nothing about last night felt natural. After brewing a pot of coffee strong enough to wake the dead, though right then I wasn't sure I wanted anything waking, I stepped outside. The air felt heavier now, like humidity mixed with something colder. A strange contradiction I could feel on my skin. As I walked the property, everything appeared normal. Too normal. The bathhouse door creaked in the breeze, the picnic tables sat empty, and the forest loomed with the same quiet tension as before. But when I passed pad number 3, I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Fresh footprints. Human. Bare. Leading from the tree line to the depression in the soil. And from the depression, nothing. They simply ended, as if whoever left them had stepped directly into the earth. I crouched down, brushing the edge of the soil with my fingertips. It was warm again. Not just warmer than the air, but warm like breath on skin. A faint vibration pulsed through the ground, almost like a heartbeat buried too deep to belong to anything living. This wasn't an animal burrow. This wasn't geological. Something here was alive, but not in any way I understood. Before I could dig further, I heard the crunch of gravel behind me. Elias. Levi's voice, low and strained. I stood and faced him. He looked even more exhausted in daylight, like he hadn't truly slept in years. "Don't go messing around with that," he said, nodding at the soil. "Nothing good comes from digging up the past around here." I wanted to ask him what he meant, to push him until he said the thing he was so afraid to speak aloud, but something in his expression stopped me. Not fear for himself, but fear for me. "You should pack up," he said. "Today. Before sunset." His voice cracked around the last word. I walked with him back toward the small office building, a converted shed with peeling paint and a sign that used to read "Welcome," but now looked more like a warning. As we walked, Levi told me pieces, small fragments of a story that didn't connect, yet. This place wasn't always an RV park. It used to be a family campground back in the 70s. There were disappearances. Not many, just enough to make folks uneasy. And then there was the fire. His voice faltered. He swallowed hard. 4 people died, a whole family. Nobody ever figured out what caused it. A chill ran down my spine, not from the cold, but from the way Levi said "figured out," as if the truth had never been lost, just buried. "Who were they?" I asked. He hesitated. "The Marshalls. Husband, wife, 2 kids. Bodies never recovered. Place burned too hot. Left a hole in the ground where pad number 3 is now. The ground I felt breathing, the ground with footprints leading into it. I stopped walking. "Levi, are you telling me?" He cut me off with a shake of his head. "Don't. Please don't make me say it. I've kept this place running because someone has to watch it. Someone has to warn folks off. But nobody listens. Nobody ever listens until it's too late." His hands trembled as he reached for the door. But before he opened it, he looked over his shoulder, as if making sure something wasn't standing behind him, or rising. I left him there at the door, wrestling with whatever burden he'd been carrying for decades. Part of me felt guilty walking away, but a stronger part knew that the only way to understand this place was to see it firsthand. So I followed the footprints back to the trees. The forest beyond the pads was dense, thick with brush and old trunks, blackened by time. The deeper I walked, the quieter the world became, the sounds thinning out until even my own breathing felt intrusive. Branches creaked under my boots, light fractured through the canopy in thin, trembling beams. And then I saw it. A clearing, perfectly circular, too perfect to be natural. In the center stood what looked like the remains of a fire ring, old stones blackened with soot, half buried in the ground. The earth inside the ring was scorched, even though no fire had burned there in years. The air above it shimmered slightly. Heat distortion. In the middle of a cold forest. I stepped closer, drawn by something I couldn't name. My father used to call certain places thin places, spots where the boundary between what is and what was blurs, where memories get caught like leaves in a stream. I never believed him. I always chalked it up to his love of ghost stories and campfire tales. But standing there, staring at that scorched earth, I knew what he meant. The ground hummed. A low, steady vibration. Like something trapped beneath it was trying to get free. And then, soft as a sigh, I heard a voice. "Help." I froze. It didn't sound close. It sounded under me. "Help us." My throat tightened. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to turn around and get back to my RV and drive until the hollow was nothing but a bad memory. But another instinct, some twisted mix of compassion and morbid curiosity, rooted me in place. I knelt and pressed my palm to the soil. It pulsed against my skin. Another voice whispered through the earth, higher pitched, trembling. "It's dark." A child's voice. My breath trembled. My hands shook. The fire. The Marshall family. Bodies never recovered. My mind raced through the pieces Levi had given me, through the strange warmth of the soil, through the shadowed figure I saw watching pad number 3. Everything pointed toward the same terrible possibility. The Marshalls never left. But something else happened next. Something that shattered any illusion that I was dealing with trapped spirits or lingering echoes. Because something moved beneath the dirt. Something long. Something that slithered. The soil shifted under my palm, rising slightly, then flattening again, like something was crawling just below the surface. I jerked my hand back, stumbling onto my heels. A shadow passed beneath the ground, broad, sinuous, too large to be any animal native to the region. It moved toward the tree line, disappearing under the roots. And then the forest exhaled, this long, rattling breath that made the leaves tremble. I didn't remember walking backward, but suddenly I was 15 feet away from the ring, heart hammering so hard it hurt. Whatever was beneath that soil, it wasn't human. And whatever was whispering through it wasn't alone. The sky dimmed suddenly, clouds rolling over the hollow faster than seemed natural. The temperature dropped so sharply, my breath fogged again. I didn't need anyone to tell me that the hollow wasn't just haunted. It was hungry. I turned and headed back toward camp, every muscle tight, every step feeling like something was watching from between the trees. But the moment I stepped out of the woods and back into the open, I saw something that made the fear I'd felt so far seem small and almost childish. A new set of footprints, fresh, bare, leading straight to my RV door, and the door was open. The sight of that door hanging open, my door, hit me harder than anything else that had happened in Maple Hollow. It wasn't just fear, it was violation. Someone or something had been inside the one space I believed I could control. My RV wasn't just a vehicle. It was the last piece of stability I had after losing my dad. the last piece of what felt like home. And now even that had been breached. I stood frozen for a few seconds, heart slamming against my ribs so hard it felt like it was trying to punch its way out. The wind shifted through the hollow, making the door sway slightly, emitting a low creak that sounded almost like a warning. My breath fogged in a thin, trembling cloud. Every instinct screamed at me to back away. But running wasn't an option. Not yet. Not when I needed to know what was waiting for me. I stepped forward slowly, forcing my breathing to steady, forcing my pulse into something like rhythm. Gravel crunched underfoot, each sound sharp enough to echo through the quiet. My fingers brushed the outside wall of the RV as I approached, grounding me, reminding me this was still mine. I reached the doorway, grabbed the handle, and gently pulled it shut behind me as I stepped inside. The silence inside the RV was suffocating, heavy, like the air had been disturbed and hadn't settled back into place yet. Nothing looked obviously damaged, no cabinet flung open, no belongings scattered across the floor. But the silence was wrong. Then I noticed the smell. Dirt, warm soil, and something faintly metallic like old blood or rust. It was strongest in the back near the bed. I took a slow step toward it, then another. The floor creaked softly, and each sound felt louder than the last. My flashlight beam trembled across the interior until it reached the mattress. That's when I saw it. A long streak of dark soil dragged across the fitted sheet, as if something had climbed up onto the bed. My stomach lurched. Beside the streak, pressed into the sheet with unsling precision, was a handprint. Not muddy, not smeared. Just a perfect dark outline, every finger distinct, every crease defined, like the print had been burned into the fabric. I stepped closer, reaching out with a hesitant finger. The print was warm. I jerked my hand back like I'd touched a stove. And as I did, I caught something else at the corner of my eye, a scrap of paper partially tucked beneath my pillow. My name was written on it in shaky handwriting. Not Elias, not my full name, just Eli. The same name only my dad used. My throat tightened as I unfolded the paper with trembling fingers. 3 words, barely legible, written in what looked like charcoal or soot. Don't go back. My first instinct was denial. Maybe Levi had written it, maybe he'd tried to warn me, maybe someone else with good intentions had somehow known I would come back from the woods shaken and confused. But then I looked closely. The paper was old, yellowed at the edges, like it had been sitting in the ground for years. And the handwriting, I recognized it. Not perfectly, time does that, but enough to make my chest seize. Enough to drag me right back into the memory of sitting beside my father as he filled out camping logs, trip notes, little reminders he'd leave on scraps of paper. No. Impossible. It had to be my imagination, grief twisting memory into something supernatural. I closed my eyes, forcing myself to breathe. My father never camped in Maple Hollow. He never mentioned this place. A knock cut through my thoughts. Loud, sudden, violent. I gasped and spun toward the door. But it wasn't coming from the door. It was coming from beneath the RV. The entire frame shook with the impact. The metallic floor vibrating under my feet. A second knock hit harder. Then a third. Then a slow dragging sound like something was pulling itself along the undercarriage, like it was trying to find a way inside. I backed away from the bed, gripping the countertop for stability as the knocking grew rhythmic. 3 knocks, a pause, 2 knocks. The exact pattern I'd heard by pad number 3. My fear sharpened into clarity. Whatever crawled beneath that soil had followed me, and now it wanted into my RV the same way it wanted into the ground beneath pad number 3. I grabbed my keys with shaking hands, my mind racing. I didn't have time to pack. Didn't have time to think. I needed to leave. I lunged toward the driver's seat, started the engine, and shoved the RV into drive. The knocking intensified, frantic, desperate. The whole frame vibrated with unnatural strength. Something scraped the metal underside, leaving long, jagged lines that screeched through the cabin. Then I hit the gas. The RV lurched forward, tires spinning in loose gravel before catching traction. I drove toward the park exit as fast as I could without losing control, eyes darting to the mirrors. But The mirrors showed nothing. No figure, no movement, only the hollow disappearing behind me. I didn't slow down until I hit the main road. Even then, I didn't stop. I drove for 20 minutes before pulling onto the shoulder, chest heaving, hands trembling so hard I could barely keep hold of the steering wheel. The knocks had stopped. The scraping had stopped. But the feeling hadn't. That heavy, watchful weight clinging to my thoughts. I stepped out of the RV into the cold air, trying to steady myself. Cars passed occasionally, the normal world resuming around me. It should have felt comforting. But the longer I stood there, the more I realized something wasn't right. Because the soil mark on my sheet, the one that formed the perfect handprint, had matched my father's hand. Not the size of a stranger's, not a child's, not a distorted impression from something inhuman. It looked exactly like the prints he used to leave on the hood of our old truck when he leaned over to tie down gear. But he had never been here. Unless something in Maple Hollow had known me. Known him, known our story, knew exactly what it needed to show to keep me from going back. But why keep me out? Why warn me? Why use his handwriting? Something cold settled in my stomach. Not fear, not confusion, recognition. Not everything in Maple Hollow wanted me gone. Some part of that place, some buried, desperate part, was begging me to uncover the truth. And another part of it, the darker part, wanted to make sure I never returned. I couldn't leave it at that. Not anymore. Not anymore. Not after what I'd seen. Not after hearing those voices beneath the soil. And not after that scrap of paper. My dad had always told me the same thing whenever I hesitated on a trail, whenever I feared getting lost or going too far. If something scares you this deeply, Ely, it's either a warning or a calling. I didn't know which one Maple Hollow was yet, but I was going to find out. I sat behind the wheel for nearly 10 minutes before I could convince myself to drive back, not into Maple Hollow itself. No, I wasn't ready for that, but toward the nearest town so I could catch my breath and gather whatever truth I could about that place. The first gas station on the edge of town looked like it hadn't been updated since the early 90s, but the lights were on and a clerk was inside, sorting receipts. The bell chimed when I entered, and he looked up with the kind of expression that told me he'd seen 1,000 travelers come and go, and that he could tell at a glance that something was wrong with me. "Rough morning?" he asked. I didn't know where to begin. But after everything Maple Hollow had shown me, lying felt pointless. So I told him exactly where I'd been camping. The man's face drained of color. "You were at Maple Hollow?" His voice dropped into something like disbelief. "They still letting people stay in there?" I hesitated. The weight in my chest answered before I did. I think Levi's the only one still running it. At the mention of Levi, the clerk's expression tightened further. "You need to stop going there," he said plainly, as if he was telling me not to step into traffic. "That place isn't right." Wasn't right long before Levi ever took it over. I pulled out a stool, bracing myself for whatever he was about to tell me. "What happened there?" He rubbed his jaw, gaze briefly distant. The Marshall fire back in '79, folks said it was a propane explosion. Others swore it was a lantern knocked over in the middle of the night. But the fire, it wasn't normal. Burned hotter than any gas flame should have. Firefighters swore the ground itself was burning, said when they tried to dig the debris out, the soil underneath was glowing. Glowing. My stomach tightened. "You said the bodies were never found, right?" He nodded slowly. "And not because they burned. Not fully. Something else happened. Something under that campground. Some said it was a sinkhole that opened up. Some said the family fell into it in the confusion. But people living nearby, they heard things. Screams, but not from the surface. The voices, the warmth in the soil, the breathing." My hands trembled on the counter. He leaned forward. "Some say the Marshalls never died in that fire, at least not the way we think of dying." That sentence hung between us, heavy as fog. "And Levi?" I asked. The clerk sighed. "Levi was the first one to reach the fire that night. He was just a teenager. Saw everything. Things he's never talked about. Sheriff told folks to drop it. And Levi, well, he took over that land when he got older, started running it as an RV park, but not because he wanted to. More like he felt obligated to protect people or obligated to protect whatever was under the ground. I didn't ask. I didn't want the answer yet. I thanked him, left the station, and sat in my RV with the engine idling. Everything pointed in the same direction. Something beneath Maple Hollow was alive. Something from that old fire had awakened or survived or changed. And the voices I heard weren't just trapped memories. They were warnings. Or pleas. Don't go back. My father's handwriting, a message on old paper, found inside my RV by something that wasn't human. And yet, something had tried to speak to me, tried to reach out. I looked toward the direction of Maple Hollow, hidden beyond the trees and the curve of the back road. Fear wanted me to keep driving until the hollow was 100 miles behind me. But something deeper, something quieter, felt like it was pulling me back. I turned the RV around. I didn't drive all the way into the park. Instead, I stopped just before the main entrance, shutting off the engine and stepping out into the cold air. The hollow felt different from here, distant but present, like a heartbeat you can feel through walls. The sky had begun to dim again, even though it was early afternoon. That unnatural dimness I'd seen before, clouds rolling in fast and low, as if drawn toward the hollow. I walked along the tree line until I found the narrow path where I'd first seen the shadowed figure the night before. The fog was already starting to creep through the trees again, coiling along the forest floor like smoke. As I approached the clearing where I'd found this on the scorched ring, I felt it before I heard it. A low vibration. The ground pulsed under my feet like it was exhaling. And then, faintly, help. Not whispered, not desperate, just present. I stepped into the clearing, the circle of blackened earth seeming to throb with memory. I knelt down, placing my hand against the soil like I had before, but this time something was different. The soil wasn't just warm, it grabbed me. My hands sank deeper, an inch, then two, as if the earth beneath it softened like wet clay. I tried to pull back instinctively, but the ground held firm, as if trying to draw me closer to whatever lay beneath. I gasped and jerked my body backward, tearing my hand free and stumbling onto the grass. My palm burned as though I'd pressed it against a hot stovetop. The ground pulsed again. Then the voices returned. It's dark. We're still here. Help us. Children, adults, multiple voices layered into one faint, trembling chorus. But before I could respond, before I could even breathe, another voice rose beneath them. Not human, deeper, older. A low rumbling that vibrated the soil, the stones, the air itself. It drowned out the other voices, silenced them. Something shifted beneath the earth, and I saw the soil at the center of the ring rise in a mound, swelling upward like something huge was pushing against it from below. I stumbled backward. Then the ground burst. Not fully, just enough for something pale to break the surface. A hand, long fingers, gray, mottled skin, reaching upwards with slow, unnatural precision. Not gasping for air, not clawing for escape, reaching. For me, I turned and ran. Branches tore at my arms. Roots caught my feet. My breaths came ragged and fast as I sprinted through the trees, heart pounding in my ears. The forest didn't fight me. It urged me forward, as if even the trees didn't want to see what was rising from that soil. When I broke into the clearing of the RV pads, the fog had thickened into a curtain. I could barely see 6 feet ahead. My RV was only a shadow in the mist, but another shadow stood closer. Tall, still, facing me. The same figure from the night before. It didn't move, didn't breathe, only watched. I stopped, chest heaving, feeling the cold dampness of fear settling deep into my bones. And in that suspended moment, a terrible realization washed over me. This wasn't the thing beneath the soil. This was the thing guarding it. Before I could decide what to do, Levi stepped through the fog behind the figure, his face pale, eyes hollow with dread. Elias, don't move. His voice cracked like ice splintering. The figure tilted its head slightly, as though curious. Levi raised both hands in a trembling plea. It's not after you, he whispered. It's after whatever followed you back from the woods. And in that moment, the truth slammed into me. I hadn't escaped Maple Hollow's secret. I had carried a piece of it with me. The fog around my RV darkened suddenly, swirling inward like smoke being sucked toward a flame. The air grew colder, so cold I could feel frost forming on my eyelashes. Levi's voice rose, sharp with urgency. "Get in the RV, Elias! Now!" I sprinted. The figure didn't chase me. It didn't have to. The fog did. It surged after me in a wave of gray, swallowing the pads behind me. I yanked my door open, leapt inside, slammed it shut, and turned the ignition with shaking hands. Through the windshield, the fog pressed against the glass like palms, formless, searching. I floored the gas. The RV roared forward, tires skidding, gravel exploding behind me. I didn't look back. Not until the road was straight, the forest thinning, the hollow disappearing behind a veil of trees. Only then did the fog recede. Only then did the air warm again. Only then did I let myself breathe. I don't know what Maple Hollow really is. A burial ground? A wound in the earth? A place where something ancient slipped through during the Marshall Fire? But I know this. Some secrets aren't just buried. They're guarded, fed, woken. And Maple Hollow RV Retreat, quiet, forgotten, avoided, is still breathing. Some nights when the wind is just right, when the world feels too quiet, I swear I can hear the faintest knock beneath the floor of my RV. 3 knocks, a pause, 2 knocks, a reminder, a warning, a calling. And I know one day I'll have to go back.